disappeared saying she needed me time. I trusted her until I found out where she really was. When she came home that night, divorce papers were already on her pillow. Her reaction? Unbelievable. My name's Logan Pierce. I'm 36 years old, and I used to think marriage was like a well-cooked lasagna. Layered, comforting, takes genuine effort, and best enjoyed piping hot with someone you actually give a damn about. What I didn't realize, what I was too blind or too stupid or too comfortable to see, was that mine had been sitting in the back of the fridge for months, getting colder and more congealed by the day. Nobody tells you that the hardest part about a failing marriage isn't the dramatic blow-ups or the thrown dishes you see in movies. It's the slow, creeping realization that you've been eating cold leftovers and convincing yourself they still taste fine. Saturdays used to be sacred in our house, and I mean that in the most suburban, beautifully mundane way possible. We'd sleep in until some ungodly hour like 9:30, which felt like noon to us because we're not 20 anymore and hangovers last 3 days now. Then we'd stumble into the kitchen, still half asleep, and attempt to make pancakes while inevitably burning at least two because one of us would get distracted arguing about which show to binge next. We'd spend the afternoon melting into the couch, her feet tucked under my legs, both of us pretending we understood the plot of whatever pretentious documentary she'd picked. Later, we'd drag ourselves to the farmer's market downtown, acting like we cared about organic kale and artisanal honey when really, and I mean really, we just wanted those free cheese samples from the Vermont vendor who never asked questions and had the good stuff. Those Saturdays felt like home, like safety, like the kind of comfortable rhythm you build with someone over years of choosing them every single day. But then something shifted, and it happened so gradually I didn't even notice at first. She started saying she needed me time. Not in a demanding way or anything hostile, just casual mentions here and there. I think I need some me time this weekend, she'd say, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone like it was the most natural thing in the world. And look, I'm not some Neanderthal who thinks wives exist solely for my entertainment. Everyone needs to recharge their batteries, decompress, do whatever the self-care blogs say you're supposed to do to avoid becoming a rage-filled zombie. So I said sure, absolutely, take all the time you need. I'm a supportive husband. I'm evolved. I read articles about emotional labor and everything. Except some me time became every single weekend without fail. Every Saturday, like clockwork, she'd announce her need for solitude and disappear for hours. I started calling it National Alone Day in my head. Except the joke wasn't funny because the only person actually alone was me, sitting on our couch, watching shows by myself and eating cereal for dinner like some divorced sad sack. Which, spoiler alert, I basically already was without knowing it. I'd text her casual things like, "Want me to save you some Thai food?" And she'd respond with, "Already ate. Thanks," with an exclamation point that felt aggressive in its cheerfulness. Who the hell was she eating with? Where was she going? These questions started as tiny whispers in the back of my mind, but eventually grew into full-volume screaming. The thing about being the person left behind is that you start noticing everything, and I mean everything. Suddenly you're aware that she's doing her hair differently, that she bought new workout clothes even though she's supposedly going to the same gym she's been going to for 3 years, that she's humming songs you've never heard while making breakfast. You become a detective in your own home, examining clues you wish you'd never found, piecing together a puzzle you'd rather leave incomplete. I'd catch myself staring at her while she got ready to leave, watching her apply mascara in the bathroom mirror with the door halfway open, and I'd think, when did she start wearing mascara to the gym? But I didn't say anything because saying something would make it real, would force a conversation I wasn't ready to have, would potentially blow up the entire life we'd built together. So instead, I stayed quiet and told myself stories. Maybe she really did need time alone. Maybe I was being paranoid and insecure. Maybe marriage was supposed to feel like this after a while. Comfortable enough that you didn't need to spend every waking moment together, mature enough to pursue separate interests and maintain individual identities. All those stupid articles I'd read about healthy relationships talked about the importance of independence and not being codependent and giving each other space to grow. So maybe, just maybe, this was what growth looked like. Maybe I was the one with the problem for wanting us to still act like we did in year one, when we couldn't keep our hands off each other and spend entire Sundays in bed talking about nothing and everything. But deep down, In that gut-level place where you know things before your brain catches up, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. You can feel it in the way someone kisses you, or doesn't. In the way conversations become shorter and less frequent. In how "I love you" transforms from a feeling into an obligation. Something you say before hanging up the phone, not because you're overwhelmed with emotion, but because it's what married people are supposed to say. Our marriage had become a performance we were both tired of rehearsing, except I was still trying to remember my lines while she'd apparently found a whole new script with someone else. I remember one Saturday morning specifically, about 3 months into her weekly disappearing act, when I made blueberry pancakes from scratch, the real deal with buttermilk and everything, not that box mix garbage. I even cut up fresh strawberries and whipped cream because I'm not some animal who serves plain pancakes. She came downstairs already dressed in her gym clothes, hair pulled back, smelling like that expensive perfume she usually saved for date nights we never had anymore. "You're not staying for breakfast?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and not accusatory, not desperate. She glanced at the pancakes, then at her watch, then at me with this apologetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rain check," she said. "I really need to get going." And then she was gone, out the door before I could even respond, leaving me standing in our kitchen with a plate full of cooling pancakes and the growing realization that I was slowly, painfully losing my wife to something, or someone, I couldn't see. That's when I stopped calling it National Alone Day and started calling it what it really was. The beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and my own ability to recognize when I was being played for a complete and total fool. At first, I genuinely thought she'd joined some kind of secret spa cult, the kind where they convince middle-class women that spending $200 on a hot stone massage is investing in yourself, and that drinking overpriced kombucha makes you spiritually enlightened. I pictured her in one of those fluffy white robes, cucumber slices on her eyes, whale sounds playing in the background while some person named Crystal with healing hands told her to release her toxins, or whatever the hell they say in those places. It seemed plausible, honestly. She'd leave around noon every Saturday, always with this little wave and a promise that she'd be back later, which is the vaguest word in the English language and should be illegal in marriage contracts. Then she'd roll back home sometime after dark, usually around 9 or 10, smelling faintly of lavender and what I can only describe as guilt, though at the time I didn't have a name for that particular scent. I told myself she was decompressing from the week, maybe journaling about gratitude and self-love and all those buzzwords that Instagram therapists throw around like confetti. God knows her job was stressful. She worked in marketing for a company that sold organic dog treats to people with more money than sense. And apparently, convincing rich people that their golden doodles needed grain-free biscuits took a psychological toll. So yeah, maybe she needed those Saturdays to herself. Maybe I was being the stereotypical clingy husband who couldn't handle his wife having a life outside their marriage. Maybe I needed to check my own insecurities and be more supportive. I actually said these things to myself out loud while washing dishes alone on Saturday nights, like some kind of self-help podcast playing in my own head. But then I started noticing things, little things that didn't quite add up, like when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle and you find a piece that's clearly from a different box entirely. The car mileage was the first real red flag that smacked me across the face. I'm not proud of this, but one Saturday after she left, I went out to check something in the garage and happened to glance at the odometer in her car. Happened to glance. Right. Who am I kidding? I specifically walked out there to look because my gut was screaming at me and I needed something concrete to either validate or dismiss this growing paranoia eating away at my insides. The mileage read 15 miles more than it had that morning. 15 extra miles. Our gym. The one she'd been a member of for 3 years, the one with the fancy eucalyptus towels and the smoothie bar, was exactly 4 miles away. For miles there, for miles back, that's 8 miles total. Unless the treadmill had somehow developed wheels and relocated to the next county, something wasn't adding up and the math wasn't mathing, as the kids say. I stood there in our garage for probably 10 minutes, just staring at those numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something innocent and explainable. Maybe she'd driven to the grocery store afterward? Except we had plenty of food and she never came home with bags. Maybe she'd gone to get gas, but the tank was still 3/4 full. Maybe she'd taken a scenic route because she needed to clear her head and driving helped her think? Except my wife hated driving and complained about gas prices constantly, so taking an unnecessary 7-mile joyride seemed wildly out of character. Every explanation I invented felt flimsier than the last, like trying to build a house out of wet tissue paper. Then came the Saturday that really sealed the deal, the one where all my suspicions crystallized into something I could no longer ignore or explain away with mental gymnastics. She came downstairs that morning wearing red lipstick, and I'm not talking about some subtle nude shade or a light pink tint that could pass for natural. I'm talking full-on, stop traffic, look at me red, the kind of red that says, I have plans and you're not invited to them. She was also wearing this black athletic outfit I'd never seen before, the kind that looked more like it belonged on a fitness influencer's Instagram than someone going to casually use an elliptical machine. Her hair was styled, actually styled with product and effort, and she'd put on perfume. Perfume. To go sweat on a Stairmaster surrounded by divorced dads and college kids on winter break. You're going to the gym like that? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual and not accusatory, even though inside I was screaming. She turned and smiled at me, this bright, practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, confidence boost. Just like that. Confidence boost. As if the explanation was perfectly reasonable, and I was weird for questioning why someone needed bright red lipstick and designer workout clothes to run on a treadmill in a fluorescent-lit room that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. Confidence boost, she repeated, grabbing her keys and her water bottle, a new stainless steel one I'd never seen before, because apparently everything in her life was getting upgraded except our marriage. Yeah, sure, I thought as the garage door closed behind her. Confidence boost. Because nothing says, I'm working on my self-esteem, like dressing up for a stationary bike. Apparently, dumb husbands had become the new self-care accessory, and I was wearing the title like a participation trophy I never asked for. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, that familiar silver sedan I'd helped her pick out 3 years ago when her old one finally died, and I felt something shift inside me. Not quite anger yet. More like resignation mixed with this creeping dread that I'd been living in denial for months, maybe longer. The rest of that day, I spent Googling things I never thought I'd Google, phrases like signs your wife is cheating, and how to tell if your spouse is lying, and am I paranoid or right, which yielded about 10 million results because apparently I wasn't alone in this particular brand of domestic nightmare. Every article said the same things. Changes in appearance, unexplained absences, new attention to grooming, defensive behavior when questioned, decreased intimacy at home. Check, 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 and check. I was basically playing infidelity bingo and winning every round, except there was no prize, just this hollow feeling in my chest that felt like someone had scooped out my insides with a rusty spoon. When she came home that night at 9:45, I checked the time because I'd become that person now, the one who monitored comings and goings like a prison warden. She was glowing. Actually glowing. Like she'd just had the best workout of her life, or discovered enlightenment, or, more likely, spent the last several hours doing something that had nothing to do with fitness equipment. The red lipstick was mostly gone, but you could see the faint stain on her lips, and her hair was slightly messed up in a way that didn't look like workout sweat, but more like someone had run their hands through it. She breezed past me in the living room, called out, "Great session today," and headed straight for the shower without making eye contact. I sat there on the couch, Netflix asking me if I was still watching for the third time, and realized that I'd become the punchline to a joke I didn't even know was being told. My wife was living an entire separate life every Saturday, and I'd been too trusting, too comfortable, too damn stupid to see it happening right in front of my face. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was knowing that she thought I was too oblivious to notice, that she'd looked at me that morning in my old sweatpants and bedhead and calculated that I was safe to deceive, easy to fool, too wrapped up in my own comfortable bubble to question her bright red confidence boost. There's nothing scarier than catching your own reflection looking suspicious, and I mean genuinely unhinged in a way that makes you question who you've become. I'd always been a pretty relaxed guy, the kind of person who didn't sweat the small stuff, who rolled with punches, who prided himself on being easygoing and rational, and not one of those jealous, controlling husbands you see in bad Lifetime movies. But suddenly, seemingly overnight, I'd transformed into Sherlock Holmes except with crippling trust issues, and significantly less heroin. I found myself doing things I never thought I'd do, things that would have disgusted past me, things that made me feel dirty and pathetic, but also oddly necessary, because what else was I supposed to do? Just keep pretending everything was fine while my marriage crumbled around me like a stale cookie? The GPS history was my first real investigative move, and let me tell you, it felt both empowering and absolutely soul-crushing at the same time. Modern cars basically track your every movement like you're a criminal on parole, which is great for finding that restaurant you went to 6 months ago, but terrible when you're trying to hide an affair. I waited until she was in the shower one Sunday morning, steam pouring out from under the bathroom door, and I grabbed her car keys like some kind of suburban spy. My hands were actually shaking as I sat in the driver's seat and pulled up the navigation history, which should have been full of addresses and timestamps that would finally give me answers that would either confirm my suspicions or prove I was losing my mind over nothing. Except it was gone. Completely wiped. Empty. The screen showed absolutely nothing, like she'd never driven the car anywhere ever, like it had sat in our garage and used since the day we bought it. The history had been deleted, meticulously erased, and you don't delete your GPS history unless you have something to hide. Innocent people don't scrub their digital footprints. People going to the gym don't need to cover their tracks. The emptiness of that screen told me more than any address could have, and I sat there in her car in our garage, feeling my stomach drop to somewhere around my feet. She knew. She knew I might check. She was being careful, calculating, which meant this wasn't some spontaneous thing or a confused moment of weakness. This was planned, ongoing, and sophisticated enough that she was taking countermeasures. I stumbled back into the house feeling like I'd been punched in the throat, trying to arrange my face into something normal before she came out of the bathroom. When she emerged 10 minutes later wrapped in a towel with her hair wet and her skin pink from the heat, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just confirmed every fear I'd been harboring by virtue of what she'd deliberately hidden. "Morning," she said cheerfully, kissing my cheek as she passed. Her lips felt like ice even though she'd just stepped out of a hot shower. I managed to mumble something back, but I don't even remember what, probably just some grunt that could pass for communication. The questions started that same day, casual little probes disguised as normal husband conversation, each one a tiny test to see how she'd react. "Where were you today?" I asked that afternoon while we were both in the kitchen, her making tea and me pretending to read something on my phone. She was stirring honey into her mug, that little spoon clinking against ceramic, and she didn't even pause. "The gym," she said, blinking at me with these wide, innocent eyes like I'd asked her the color of the sky. Why? That single word hung between us, suspicious and defensive, turning my simple question into an interrogation I hadn't meant to start. I shrugged, going for casual and probably missing by a mile. "Just making sure you didn't join the Navy without telling me." It was supposed to be a joke, the kind of dumb husband humor I usually deployed to defuse tension, but it landed flat. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She just stared at me for a long moment with this unreadable expression, something between annoyance and fear, before turning back to her tea and saying, "You're being weird." And maybe I was being weird, but weird seemed like a pretty reasonable response to discovering your wife was systematically lying to you and covering her digital tracks like a mob boss. That night, I couldn't sleep, which was becoming a regular occurrence and probably taking years off my life from stress alone. I lay in bed next to her, listening to her breathe, watching the rise and fall of the blanket, and wondering who she'd been with earlier that day, wondering what they talked about, wondering if she laughed with him the way she used to laugh with me before everything got stale. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and went downstairs to the living room, flipping on a single lamp and just sitting there in the semi-darkness like some kind of depression commercial. Our wedding photo sat on the bookshelf across from the couch, this big 8x10 in a silver frame that her mother had given us as a gift. We looked so young in it, so stupidly happy, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery and couldn't believe our luck. She wore white, obviously, with flowers in her hair, and I wore a suit that was too big in the shoulders because I'd lost weight from wedding stress. We were 26 and 25, respectively, convinced we'd figured out something that most people missed, that our love was different and special and immune to the statistics about divorce rates and infidelity and growing apart. Looking at that photo now felt like looking at strangers, People I used to know but didn't recognize anymore. People who had no idea what was coming. I wondered if past me, that goofy kid in the too big suit, would punch present me for letting things get this bad, for missing the signs, for being so comfortably oblivious that my wife felt confident enough to maintain an entire secret life. Or would he just hand me a drink and commiserate, acknowledging that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people change in ways you can't predict or prevent, that marriage is just as much about luck and timing as it is about commitment and effort? Probably the drink, honestly. Past me was pretty non-confrontational. The rest of that week, I became someone I didn't recognize, someone obsessive and paranoid and constantly on edge. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, password protected, of course, changed from the one I used to know. I looked through her emails on the computer, nothing suspicious, which meant she was using an account I didn't know about. I even briefly considered following her one Saturday, but talked myself out of it, because that felt like a line I wasn't ready to cross, a level of crazy I hadn't quite reached yet. Every interaction between us became a performance, me pretending everything was normal while mentally cataloging every inconsistency, every strange detail, every moment that confirmed what I already knew but wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. The mirror in our bathroom became my enemy. Every morning I'd brush my teeth and catch my own reflection looking back at me with these tired eyes and this suspicious expression, and I'd think, this is what betrayal looks like. Not dramatic or cinematic, not some big revelation with shouting and tears, but just this slow erosion of trust that turns you into a detective in your own home, that makes you question every word and doubt every explanation, that transforms casual conversations into cross-examinations. I looked older suddenly, more worn down, like I'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before, gray hairs popping up at my temples that I swear appeared overnight. This general sense of defeat hanging over me like a cloud. She asked me once during this period if I was okay, if something was bothering me, and the irony was so thick I almost choked on it. Was something bothering me? Oh, nothing much, just the complete destruction of my marriage and the growing certainty that my wife was cheating on me every single weekend while I sat at home, like an idiot eating takeout and watching TV shows we used to watch together. But instead of saying any of that, I just smiled and said I was tired, work was stressful, nothing to worry about. Because what was the alternative? Confronting her without proof? Accusing her based on suspicions and deleted GPS history? I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away or turn around on me. So I lived in this bizarre limbo, knowing but not knowing, suspecting but not confirming, going through the motions of marriage while internally preparing for its end. And the whole time, the mirror kept showing me this stranger with suspicious eyes, and I kept wondering when exactly I'd stopped recognizing myself. My buddy Eli, who's been divorced twice and wears it like a badge of honor he didn't want but earned anyway, said something to me about 3 weeks into my spiral that hit way too close to home. We were at a sports bar watching a game neither of us cared about, drinking beers that tasted like regret and broken promises, and I made some offhand comment about how my wife needed so much space lately. He stopped mid-sip, put his beer down with this heavy thud that made the bartender look over, and said, "Logan, let me tell you something I learned the hard way, twice. If she starts saying she needs space, she's already sharing someone else's." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was telling me the score of the game or commenting on the weather. No judgment in his voice, just this tired wisdom that comes from getting burned repeatedly by the same fire. I laughed when he said it, this hollow sound that didn't reach any genuine part of me. Because what else do you do when someone verbalizes your worst fear in the middle of a Tuesday night at Hooligans Bar and Grill? You laugh it off, you make a joke about him being cynical, you change the subject to literally anything else. But that comment burrowed into my brain like a parasite and set up permanent residence there, playing on repeat every time she walked out the door with her gym bag and her secrets. Eli was 2 for 2 in failed marriages, sure, but maybe that didn't make him pessimistic. Maybe it just made him experienced. Maybe he could see things I was still desperately trying not to see. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do, something that felt both empowering and like a complete admission of defeat. I called Bill Hargrove, a lawyer whose name I'd gotten from a coworker who'd gone through a messy divorce last year, and came out the other side relatively intact, at least financially. Bill had an office downtown in one of those buildings that looks like every other office building. Lots of glass and steel and the faint smell of corporate despair. I told the receptionist I needed to speak with him about a personal matter, which is apparently code for my marriage is imploding and I need professional help, because she got me an appointment for that same afternoon without asking any follow-up questions. Bill Hargrove looked exactly like you'd expect a divorce lawyer to look. Gray hair styled in a way that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Expensive suit that fit perfectly, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look scholarly and intimidating at the same time. He had this office with dark wood furniture and leather chairs and diplomas on the wall from schools I couldn't afford to visit, let alone attend. He looked like the type of guy who could draft divorce papers blindfolded while simultaneously negotiating a settlement and maybe performing minor surgery on the side. There was this aura of competence around him that was both comforting and terrifying, because hiring Bill Hargrove meant this was real, meant I was actually considering blowing up my entire life based on suspicions I couldn't yet prove. I sat down in one of those leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car and tried to explain my situation without sounding like a paranoid lunatic. "I think my wife is cheating on me," I said, and hearing the words out loud made my chest feel tight. Made the whole thing suddenly concrete instead of just theoretical. Bill didn't react, didn't show surprise or sympathy or anything really, just pulled out a legal pad and a pen and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the Saturdays, the deleted GPS history, the red lipstick, the extra mileage, all of it spilling out in this rambling confession that probably made me sound unhinged. He took notes the entire time, his pen scratching across the paper in neat, organized lines while my life fell apart in messy, disorganized chunks. When I finished, he looked up at me with these sharp blue eyes and said, "You need proof." Not, "Are you sure?" or "Have you tried couples counseling?" or any of the things I half expected him to say. Just straight to the point. "You need proof." I must have looked confused or lost because he continued, "I believe you. Your story has all the hallmarks, and my gut says you're right. But beliefs don't hold up in court or in divorce proceedings. You need evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence." He paused, tapping his expensive pen against his legal pad, then opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "Private investigator. Quiet guy. Gets results. Tell him I sent you." The card was plain white with black lettering, no fancy logo or tagline, just a name, Leo Castillo, and a phone number. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than a piece of cardstock had any right to feel, like it carried the weight of every decision I was about to make. "I just wanted advice," I said weakly, though we both knew that was bullshit. Nobody makes an appointment with a divorce lawyer for friendly advice. You don't show up at a law office downtown because you're having minor marital disagreements. You show up because your world is ending and you need someone who's seen this movie before to tell you how it ends. Bill leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in that way lawyers do when they're about to say something you don't want to hear, but need to. "Mr. Pierce, you came here for a reason. Maybe you're not ready to admit it to yourself yet, but you know what's happening. The question isn't whether your wife is cheating. You already know the answer to that. The question is whether you're ready to do something about it." He was right, of course. I'd known since the red lipstick, maybe even before that. I'd just been too scared or too comfortable or too whatever to fully acknowledge it. I left his office with the business card burning a hole in my pocket and this strange sense of relief mixed with dread. Relief because I'd finally taken action, because I wasn't just sitting around waiting to be made a fool of anymore. Dread because there was no going back from this, because calling Leo Castillo meant setting wheels in motion that would inevitably lead somewhere I wasn't sure I was ready to go. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a different version of my life. One where I was a man who hired private investigators and consulted divorce lawyers instead of a guy who made pancakes on Saturday mornings and believed in happy endings. That's how I met Leo 3 days later, in a diner on the east side of town that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987 and smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. I'd expected someone out of a noir film, trench coat, fedora, maybe a cigarette dangling from his lips, and a world-weary attitude. What I got was the most unbothered man I've ever encountered in my entire life, sitting in a corner booth wearing cargo shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and honest-to-God Crocs. Crocs. The man I was hiring to potentially catch my wife cheating was wearing rubber clogs with holes in them like he'd just come from a backyard barbecue or a very casual beach wedding. "You Logan?" he asked when I approached, not standing up or offering to shake hands. Just looking up at me with these calm brown eyes that had probably seen every variation of human betrayal imaginable. I nodded and slid into the booth across from him, suddenly feeling overdressed in my jeans and button-up shirt. There was a piece of lemon meringue pie in front of him, about half-eaten, and he took another bite before gesturing for me to talk. "Bill says you need surveillance," he said around the mouthful of pie, completely unfazed by the situation or the fact that he was currently eating dessert at 10 in the morning. I explained everything again, my third time recounting this particular nightmare, and it got a little easier each time, like I was building up immunity to my own pain through repeated exposure. Leo ate his pie and listened, occasionally nodding, but mostly just chewing thoughtfully, and I genuinely couldn't tell if he was paying attention to my marital crisis or just really focused on his dessert. When I finished, he pushed the empty plate aside, pulled out his own phone, and started typing notes with his thumbs like a teenager texting their friends. "I'll handle it," he said simply, not looking up from his screen. "Give me 3 weeks. I'll follow her Saturdays, document everything, get you what you need." "That's it?" I asked, expecting more questions, or maybe some kind of contract or discussion of payment, or literally anything more formal than a guy in Crocs saying he'd handle it. Leo finally looked up at me and smiled. This small, knowing smile that somehow made me feel like everything would be okay, or at least like I'd hired someone competent despite all evidence to the contrary. "That's it," he confirmed. "I'll email you updates. Don't call her, don't confront her, don't do anything different. Act normal. Let me do my job." He stood up, dropped cash on the table for his pie, and walked out of the diner without another word, leaving me sitting there wondering if I'd just hired a genius or made the worst decision of my life. I genuinely couldn't tell if he meant he'd handle the case or if he'd just really handled that lemon pie, but I guess I was about to find out. 3 weeks later, I got a thick manila envelope slid under my office door like some kind of ominous pizza delivery. Except instead of pepperoni and cheese, it contained photographic evidence of my wife's betrayal and the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. There was no note attached, no warning text, no phone call to prepare me. Just this fat envelope sitting on my carpet at 7:30 in the morning when I arrived at work, bulging with secrets I'd paid someone to uncover but wasn't actually ready to see. Just vibes, as my younger coworkers would say. Except these were terrible vibes. The kind that make your stomach drop and your hands shake and your brain immediately start bargaining with the universe for a different reality. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, my coffee getting cold in my hand, my heart doing this weird arrhythmic thing that couldn't possibly be healthy. Part of me wanted to leave it there, just step over it and go about my day pretending it didn't exist. Schrodinger's envelope of infidelity existing in a state where my marriage was both destroyed and intact until I actually opened it and collapsed the quantum waveform. But that's not how real life works, unfortunately. You can't just ignore evidence because it's inconvenient or painful or going to fundamentally alter your entire existence. So I picked it up, felt the weight of it, easily 50 or 60 photos based on the thickness, and walked into my office on legs that felt like they'd been replaced with jello. I sat at my desk, placed the envelope in front of me like it was a bomb I needed to defuse, and just breathed for a minute. My office suddenly felt too small, too quiet, the fluorescent lights too bright and too revealing, like they were illuminating not just the room, but every naive assumption I'd made about my marriage. The envelope had my name written on it in block letters, nothing else. Completely anonymous and yet deeply personal in a way that made me feel exposed. Through the window, I could see Barbara from accounting walking past with her morning bagel, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world was about to implode 3 feet away from her. Life just keeps going, I guess, even when yours is ending. I opened it. Inside were photographs, probably 60 of them if I had to guess, all neatly organized with timestamps printed in the corner like evidence in a criminal trial. Which, I suppose, this kind of was. My wife. A man. A black SUV. Various locations. Each photo was crystal clear, professional quality. The kind of shots that left absolutely zero room for misinterpretation or alternative explanations. Leo and his Crocs had delivered exactly what he'd promised, and I suddenly understood why Bill had recommended him despite his questionable fashion choices. This wasn't some grainy cell phone picture taken from far away that could be explained as coincidence. This was high-definition proof, damning and irrefutable. I flipped through them like flashcards of heartbreak, each one a tiny knife finding a new place to stick. There she was getting into his SUV, laughing at something he'd said. There they were at a coffee shop I didn't recognize, sitting way too close, her hand on his arm in a way that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. There was one of them walking into what looked like a hotel, and my brain tried very hard not to compute what that meant even though it was painfully obvious. Another showed them in his car, and even through the windshield you could see how she looked at him. Animated, alive, present in a way she hadn't been with me in months, maybe years. But the one that hit the hardest, the one that made my coffee taste like ash and my chest feel like someone had reached in and squeezed, was a photo of her smiling. Just smiling. Nothing dramatic or explicitly romantic. Just her face captured in a moment of genuine happiness. Except it was a smile I recognized because it used to be mine, the kind of bright, unguarded expression she'd give me when I'd surprise her with her favorite takeout or make a joke that actually landed. That smile belonged to our early years, to Saturday morning pancakes and lazy Sunday afternoons, to a version of us that apparently no longer existed. And now some other guy was getting it, was probably getting all the best parts of her while I got the tired scraps and the elaborate lies. The timestamps mocked me with their consistency and their cruelty. Every single Saturday between 4 and 7 p.m., like clockwork, like a standing appointment on her calendar. The gym translated to a 3-hour date with someone whose face I could now see clearly in high definition. He wasn't particularly handsome. That somehow made it worse. Just average looking, probably around her age, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Which meant she hadn't left me for someone objectively better or more attractive. She'd left me for someone who probably just paid attention to her, who made her feel seen, who didn't take her for granted the way I apparently had. I found myself staring at one particular photo until my vision went blurry and my coffee went from lukewarm to completely cold. It showed them sitting on a park bench, her head tilted toward him, his arms stretched behind her on the bench back in that casual possessive way that says, "We're together," without actually touching. The timestamp read 5:47 p.m. on a Saturday 3 weeks ago. That night, I couldn't sleep, which was becoming a regular occurrence and probably taking years off my life from stress alone. I lay in bed next to her, listening to her breathe, watching the rise and fall of the blanket and wondering who she'd been with earlier that day, wondering what they talked about, wondering if she laughed with him the way she used to laugh with me before everything got stale. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and went downstairs to the living room, flipping on a single lamp and just sitting there in the semi-darkness like some kind of depression commercial. Our wedding photo sat on the bookshelf across from the couch, this big 8x10 in a silver frame that her mother had given us as a gift. We looked so young in it, so stupidly happy, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery and couldn't believe our luck. She wore white, obviously, with flowers in her hair, and I wore a suit that was too big in the shoulders because I'd lost weight from wedding stress. We were 26 and 25, respectively, convinced we'd figured out something that most people missed, that our love was different and special and immune to the statistics about divorce rates and infidelity and growing apart. Looking at that photo now felt like looking at strangers, people I used to know but didn't recognize anymore, people who had no idea what was coming. I wondered if past me, that goofy kid in the too big suit, would punch present me for letting things get this bad, for missing the signs, for being so comfortably oblivious that my wife felt confident enough to maintain an entire secret life. Or would he just hand me a drink and commiserate, acknowledging that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people change in ways you can't predict or prevent, that marriage is just as much about luck and timing as it is about commitment and effort? Probably the drink, honestly. Past me was pretty non-confrontational. The rest of that week, I became someone I didn't recognize, someone obsessive and paranoid and constantly on edge. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, password protected, of course, changed from the one I used to know. I looked through her emails on the computer, Nothing suspicious, which meant she was using an account I didn't know about. I even briefly considered following her one Saturday, but talked myself out of it, because that felt like a line I wasn't ready to cross, a level of crazy I hadn't quite reached yet. Every interaction between us became a performance, me pretending everything was normal while mentally cataloging every inconsistency, every strange detail, every moment that confirmed what I already knew but wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. The mirror in our bathroom became my enemy. Every morning I'd brush my teeth and catch my own reflection looking back at me with these tired eyes and this suspicious expression, and I'd think, this is what betrayal looks like. Not dramatic or cinematic, not some big revelation with shouting and tears, but just this slow erosion of trust that turns you into a detective in your own home, that makes you question every word and doubt every explanation, that transforms casual conversations into cross-examinations. I looked older suddenly, more worn down, like I'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there before, gray hairs popping up at my temples that I swear appeared overnight. This general sense of defeat hanging over me like a cloud. She asked me once during this period if I was okay, if something was bothering me, and the irony was so thick I almost choked on it. Was something bothering me? Oh, nothing much. Just the complete destruction of my marriage and the growing certainty that my wife was cheating on me every single weekend while I sat at home like an idiot eating takeout and watching TV shows we used to watch together. But instead of saying any of that, I just smiled and said I was tired, work was stressful, nothing to worry about. Because what was the alternative? Confronting her without proof? Accusing her based on suspicions and deleted GPS history? I needed something concrete. Something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away or turn around on me. So I lived in this bizarre limbo, knowing but not knowing, suspecting but not confirming, going through the motions of marriage while internally preparing for its end. And the whole time, the mirror kept showing me this stranger with suspicious eyes, and I kept wondering when exactly I'd stopped recognizing myself. My buddy Eli, who's been divorced twice and wears it like a badge of honor he didn't want but earned anyway, said something to me about 3 weeks into my spiral that hit way too close to home. We were at a sports bar watching a game neither of us cared about, drinking beers that tasted like regret and broken promises, and I made some offhand comment about how my wife needed so much space lately. He stopped mid-sip, put his beer down with this heavy thud that made the bartender look over, and said, "Logan, let me tell you something I learned the hard way, twice. If she starts saying she needs space, she's already sharing someone else's." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was telling me the score of the game or commenting on the weather. No judgment in his voice, just this tired wisdom that comes from getting burned repeatedly by the same fire. I laughed when he said it, this hollow sound that didn't reach any genuine part of me. Because what else do you do when someone verbalizes your worst fear in the middle of a Tuesday night at Hooligans Bar and Grill? You laugh it off, you make a joke about him being cynical, you change the subject to literally anything else. But that comment burrowed into my brain like a parasite and set up permanent residence there, playing on repeat every time she walked out the door with her gym bag and her secrets. Eli was 2 for 2 in failed marriages, sure, but maybe that didn't make him pessimistic. Maybe it just made him experienced. Maybe he could see things I was still desperately trying not to see. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do, something that felt both empowering and like a complete admission of defeat. I called Bill Hargrove, a lawyer whose name I'd gotten from a coworker who'd gone through a messy divorce last year and came out the other side relatively intact, at least financially. Bill had an office downtown in one of those buildings that looks like every other office building. Lots of glass and steel, and the faint smell of corporate despair. I told the receptionist I needed to speak with him about a personal matter, which is apparently code for my marriage is imploding and I need professional help, because she got me an appointment for that same afternoon without asking any follow-up questions. Bill Hargrove looked exactly like you'd expect a divorce lawyer to look, gray hair styled in a way that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, expensive suit that fit perfectly, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look scholarly and intimidating at the same time. He had this office with dark wood furniture and leather chairs and diplomas on the wall from schools I couldn't afford to visit, let alone attend. He looked like the type of guy who could draft divorce papers blindfolded, while simultaneously negotiating a settlement and maybe performing minor surgery on the side. There was this aura of competence around him that was both comforting and terrifying, because hiring Bill Hargrove meant this was real, meant I was actually considering blowing up my entire life based on suspicions I couldn't yet prove. I sat down in one of those leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car and tried to explain my situation without sounding like a paranoid lunatic. "I think my wife is cheating on me," I said, and hearing the words out loud made my chest feel tight, made the whole thing suddenly concrete instead of just theoretical. Bill didn't react, didn't show surprise or sympathy or anything really, just pulled out a legal pad and a pen and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the Saturdays, the deleted GPS history, the red lipstick, the extra mileage, all of it spilling out in this rambling confession that probably made me sound unhinged. He took notes the entire time, his pen scratching across the paper in neat, organized lines while my life fell apart in messy, disorganized chunks. When I finished, he looked up at me with these sharp blue eyes and said, "You need proof." Not "Are you sure?" or "Have you tried couples counseling?" or any of the things I half expected him to say. Just straight to the point. "You need proof." I must have looked confused or lost because he continued, "I believe you. Your story has all the hallmarks, and my gut says you're right. But beliefs don't hold up in court or in divorce proceedings. You need evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence." He paused, tapping his expensive pen against his legal pad, then opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "Private investigator. Quiet guy. Gets results. Tell him I sent you." The card was plain white with black lettering, no fancy logo or tagline, just a name, Leo Castillo, and a phone number. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a piece of cardstock had any right to feel, like it carried the weight of every decision I was about to make. "I just wanted advice," I said weakly, though we both knew that was bullshit. Nobody makes an appointment with a divorce lawyer for friendly advice. You don't show up at a law office downtown because you're having minor marital disagreements. You show up because your world is ending and you need someone who's seen this movie before to tell you how it ends. Bill leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in that way lawyers do when they're about to say something you don't want to hear but need to. "Mr. Pierce, you came here for a reason. Maybe you're not ready to admit it to yourself yet, but you know what's happening. The question isn't whether your wife is cheating. You already know the answer to that. The question is whether you're ready to do something about it." He was right, of course. I'd known since the red lipstick, maybe even before that. I'd just been too scared or too comfortable or too whatever to fully acknowledge it. I left his office with the business card burning a hole in my pocket and this strange sense of relief mixed with dread. Relief because I'd finally taken action, because I wasn't just sitting around waiting to be made a fool of anymore. Dread because there was no going back from this. Because calling Leo Castillo meant setting wheels in motion that would inevitably lead somewhere I wasn't sure I was ready to go. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a different version of my life. One where I was a man who hired private investigators and consulted divorce lawyers instead of a guy who made pancakes on Saturday mornings and believed in happy endings. That's how I met Leo 3 days later, in a diner on the east side of town that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987 and smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. I'd expected someone out of a noir film, trench coat, fedora, maybe a cigarette dangling from his lips, and a world-weary attitude. What I got was the most unbothered man I've ever encountered in my entire life, sitting in a corner booth wearing cargo shorts, a Hawaiian shirt, and honest-to-God Crocs. Crocs. The man I was hiring to potentially catch my wife cheating was wearing rubber clogs with holes in them like he'd just come from a backyard barbecue or a very casual beach wedding. "You Logan?" he asked when I approached, not standing up or offering to shake hands, just looking up at me with these calm brown eyes that had probably seen every variation of human betrayal imaginable. I nodded and slid into the booth across from him, suddenly feeling overdressed in my jeans and button-up shirt. There was a piece of lemon meringue pie in front of him, about half eaten, and he took another bite before gesturing for me to talk. "Bill says you need surveillance," he said around the mouthful of pie, completely unfazed by the situation or the fact that he was currently eating dessert at 10 in the morning. I explained everything again, my third time recounting this particular nightmare, and it got a little easier each time, like I was building up immunity to my own pain through repeated exposure. Leo ate his pie and listened, occasionally nodding, but mostly just chewing thoughtfully, and I genuinely couldn't tell if he was paying attention to my marital crisis or just really focused on his dessert. When I finished, he pushed the empty plate aside, pulled out his own phone, and started typing notes with his thumbs like a teenager texting their friends. "I'll handle it," he said simply, not looking up from his screen. "Give me 3 weeks. I'll follow her Saturdays, document everything, get you what you need." "That's it?" I asked, expecting more questions, or maybe some kind of contract or discussion of payment, or literally anything more formal than a guy in Crocs saying he'd handle it. Leo finally looked up at me and smiled. This small, knowing smile that somehow made me feel like everything would be okay, or at least like I'd hired someone competent despite all evidence to the contrary. "That's it," he confirmed. "I'll email you updates. Don't call her, don't confront her, don't do anything different. Act normal. Let me do my job." He stood up, dropped cash on the table for his pie, and walked out of the diner without another word, leaving me sitting there wondering if I'd just hired a genius or made the worst decision of my life. I genuinely couldn't tell if he meant he'd handle the case or if he'd just really handled that lemon pie, but I guess I was about to find out. 3 weeks later, I got a thick manila envelope slid under my office door like some kind of ominous pizza delivery. Except instead of pepperoni and cheese, it contained photographic evidence of my wife's betrayal and the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. There was no note attached, no warning text, no phone call to prepare me. Just this fat envelope sitting on my carpet at 7:30 in the morning when I arrived at work, bulging with secrets I'd paid someone to uncover but wasn't actually ready to see. Just vibes, as my younger coworkers would say. Except these were terrible vibes. The kind that make your stomach drop and your hands shake and your brain immediately start bargaining with the universe for a different reality. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, my coffee getting cold in my hand, my heart doing this weird arrhythmic thing that couldn't possibly be healthy. Part of me wanted to leave it there, just step over it and go about my day pretending it didn't exist. Schrodinger's envelope of infidelity existing in a state where my marriage was both destroyed and intact until I actually opened it and collapsed the quantum waveform. But that's not how real life works, unfortunately. You can't just ignore evidence because it's inconvenient or painful or going to fundamentally alter your entire existence. So I picked it up, felt the weight of it, easily 50 or 60 photos based on the thickness, and walked into my office on legs that felt like they'd been replaced with jello. I sat at my desk, placed the envelope in front of me like it was a bomb I needed to defuse, and just breathed for a minute. My office suddenly felt too small, too quiet, the fluorescent lights too bright and too revealing, like they were illuminating not just the room, but every naive assumption I'd made about my marriage. The envelope had my name written on it in block letters, nothing else. Completely anonymous and yet deeply personal in a way that made me feel exposed. Through the window, I could see Barbara from accounting walking past with her morning bagel, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world was about to implode 3 feet away from her. Life just keeps going, I guess, even when yours is ending. I opened it. Inside were photographs, probably 60 of them if I had to guess, all neatly organized with timestamps printed in the corner like evidence in a criminal trial. Which, I suppose, this kind of was. My wife. A man. A black SUV. Various locations. Each photo was crystal clear, professional quality. The kind of shots that left absolutely zero room for misinterpretation or alternative explanations. Leo and his Crocs had delivered exactly what he'd promised, and I suddenly understood why Bill had recommended him despite his questionable fashion choices. This wasn't some grainy cell phone picture taken from far away that could be explained as coincidence. This was high-definition proof, damning and irrefutable. I flipped through them like flashcards of heartbreak, each one a tiny knife finding a new place to stick. There she was getting into his SUV, laughing at something he'd said. There they were at a coffee shop I didn't recognize, sitting way too close, her hand on his arm in a way that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. There was one of them walking into what looked like a hotel, and my brain tried very hard not to compute what that meant even though it was painfully obvious. Another showed them in his car, and even through the windshield you could see how she looked at him, animated, alive, present in a way she hadn't been with me in months, maybe years. But the one that hit the hardest, the one that made my coffee taste like ash and my chest feel like someone had reached in and squeezed, was a photo of her smiling. Just smiling. Nothing dramatic or explicitly romantic. Just her face captured in a moment of genuine happiness. Except it was a smile I recognized because it used to be mine, the kind of bright, unguarded expression she'd give me when I'd surprise her with her favorite takeout or make a joke that actually landed. That smile belonged to our early years, to Saturday morning pancakes and lazy Sunday afternoons, to a version of us that apparently no longer existed. And now some other guy was getting it, was probably getting all the best parts of her while I got the tired scraps and the elaborate lies. The timestamps mocked me with their consistency and their cruelty. Every single Saturday between 4 and 7 p.m., like clockwork, like a standing appointment on her calendar. The gym translated to a 3-hour date with someone whose face I could now see clearly in high definition. He wasn't particularly handsome. That somehow made it worse. Just average looking, probably around her age, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Which meant she hadn't left me for someone objectively better or more attractive. She'd left me for someone who probably just paid attention to her, who made her feel seen, who didn't take her for granted the way I apparently had. I found myself staring at one particular photo until my vision went blurry and my coffee went from lukewarm to completely cold. It showed them sitting on a park bench, her head tilted toward him, his arms stretched behind her on the bench back in that casual possessive way that says, "We're together," without actually touching. The timestamp read 5:47 p.m. on a Saturday 3 weeks ago. Remembered that Saturday specifically because when she'd come home, I'd asked how her workout was, and she'd said, "Great, really pushed myself today," with a straight face, and I believed her because I was still clinging to the delusion that my wife wouldn't look me in the eye and lie. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to pick it up. Bill Hardro's number already pulled up from my recent calls. It rang twice before he answered with his professional lawyer voice, probably expecting a client with a standard legal question, not a man whose entire existence had just been validated and destroyed simultaneously. "Let's move forward," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant like it was coming from someone else entirely. Someone who had their shit together and knew what they were doing instead of a guy whose hands were literally trembling while holding evidence of his wife's affair. Bill paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background, the sounds of a functional office where people did normal work and didn't have their lives falling apart in real time. "You sure?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite sympathy, but maybe understanding. The voice of someone who'd guided countless people through this exact moment and knew the weight of what came next. He was giving me one last chance to back out, to shove the photos back in the envelope and pretend I'd never seen them, to choose willful ignorance over painful truth. "Bill, I've been sure since she wore perfume to the gym," I said, and saying it out loud crystallized something inside me, turned all that suspicion and paranoia and denial into cold, hard resolve. I was done being the clueless husband. I was done making excuses for behavior that had no excuse. I was done eating cold lasagna and pretending it was still good. I want to proceed with the divorce. Draw up the papers. Let's end this before I waste any more of my life on someone who checked out of our marriage months ago. There was another pause, longer this time, and then Bill's voice came back all business. "I'll have everything ready by Monday. We'll file on grounds of adultery, which in this state affects asset division and can expedite the process. Do you want to pursue any specific arrangements regarding property?" Or, he kept talking, laying out options and procedures and legal strategies. But I was only half listening because I was still staring at that photo of her smiling, trying to pinpoint exactly when I'd lost her, when we'd gone from partners to strangers who shared a mortgage and a last name, but nothing else that mattered. I spent the rest of that day in my office with the door closed, telling my assistant I wasn't taking calls and to reschedule my meetings. The photos stayed spread across my desk like a morbid gallery exhibition titled "The Death of a Marriage," or maybe 60 Ways to Realize You're an Idiot. I kept picking them up and putting them down, torturing myself with details I didn't need to notice but couldn't help seeing. The way she'd styled her hair differently for him, the outfit I'd never seen her wear at home, the body language that spoke of comfort and attraction and all the things that had evaporated from our relationship like morning dew under harsh sunlight. Around 3 in the afternoon, Eli texted asking if I wanted to grab drinks after work. I almost said no, almost told him I needed to be alone with my misery and my photographs and my shattered illusions. But then I thought about going home to the house I shared with someone who'd been systematically betraying me for months, about pretending everything was fine through dinner and then lying awake all night staring at the ceiling. And suddenly a bar with a friend who'd already survived this twice sounded like exactly what I needed. Yeah, I texted back. I'm gonna need several drinks actually. Maybe all the drinks. Is all the drinks an option? It's always an option, he replied. That kind of day? I looked at the photographs one more time, at her smile and his face and the evidence of a secret life I'd funded with joint bank accounts and mortgage payments and grocery money. That kind of life. I typed back, then started gathering the photos to put back in their envelope of doom. Each one a nail in the coffin of a marriage that had apparently died without me noticing until it was already decomposing. The papers were ready by Monday, exactly as Bill had promised, because apparently lawyers are the only professionals who actually meet their deadlines when your life is falling apart. They arrived in another manila envelope, though this one came via courier instead of mysteriously appearing under my door, which somehow made it feel more official and terrifying. The documents were clean, sharp, professional, like a legal haircut, all precise lines and no room for interpretation or second-guessing. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It read across the top in bold letters that might as well have said, "Your marriage is officially dead. Please sign here." Grounds, adultery. It was right there in black and white. Legal terminology transforming my wife's Saturday hobby into courtroom language that stripped away all the emotion and left just the cold facts. But I didn't hand them over immediately, didn't storm into the house waving papers and demanding explanations or confessions or whatever the scorned spouse is supposed to do in these situations. I'd seen enough movies to know that route led to screaming matches and thrown dishes and dramatic confrontations that nobody actually wins. Instead, I wanted something different. Peace, closure, maybe just one final moment of control in a situation where I'd felt powerless for months. So I waited one more Saturday, planned it out like some kind of twisted farewell performance, a final curtain call before the whole show shut down permanently. Saturday morning, I woke up early, earlier than I had in weeks, with this strange sense of purpose humming through my veins. I made her breakfast, the whole elaborate spread I used to make back when we were happy, or at least pretending to be. Scrambled eggs cooked low and slow the way she liked them, avocado toast on that expensive sourdough from the bakery downtown, and an almond butter smoothie with bananas and honey, because she was always on some health kick that I never quite understood but supported anyway. Basically, I made the forgiveness combo, the meal that in our early years would follow any argument or rough patch, the culinary olive branch that said I'm sorry and I love you, and let's move past this. She came downstairs around 9, hair still messy from sleep, wearing one of my old college t-shirts that had become her unofficial pajama top, and her face lit up when she saw the spread on the kitchen table. "You're sweet," she said, sliding into her chair with this genuine smile that would have melted me completely if I didn't know exactly where she'd be in a few hours. Sweet. That's what I was. Sweet, oblivious, convenient. Pick your adjective for the husband who makes breakfast while his wife plans her afternoon affair. "You're busy every weekend," I said, keeping my voice light and casual, just making conversation while I sipped my coffee and watched her eat the eggs I'd carefully prepared. "I figured I'd feed you before you vanish again." It came out more bitter than I'd intended, a little edge creeping into my tone despite my best efforts. But she either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. She laughed, actually laughed, this carefree sound that made me want to throw my coffee mug against the wall just to hear something shatter the way my chest felt constantly shattered lately. Her eyes did that guilty twitch, though, that little micro-expression I'd become an expert at reading over the past few months. Just a tiny flicker, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and I was always looking for it now. "I appreciate it," she said, taking a sip of the smoothie and making that satisfied sound she always made when food was particularly good. "This is really thoughtful." Thoughtful. Right. I was being thoughtful by preparing a last meal before serving divorce papers. Marie Antoinette would be proud. By noon she was getting ready, the familiar routine I'd watched dozens of times now with entirely different eyes. Gym clothes that cost more than regular clothes and somehow looked better than anything in my wardrobe. Hair done carefully, makeup applied, perfume sprayed. The whole production of dressing up for exercise that I'd questioned so many times in my head, but never out loud. Not until it was too late and the questions didn't matter anymore. Have a good workout, I called out as she grabbed her keys, and she turned and blew me a kiss. Actually blew me a kiss like we were in some romantic comedy and not a tragedy disguised as a marriage. Love you, she said. Those two words that had become completely meaningless through repetition and insincerity. Just sounds people make when leaving the house because it's expected and habitual. You too, I replied, and watched her drive away for what I knew would be one of the last times as my wife. The garage door closed behind her, and I sat there in the sudden silence of our house. This space we'd built together that had somehow become a stage for elaborate lies and Saturday disappearances. I poured myself a glass of wine, even though it was barely past noon, because day drinking felt appropriate for the occasion. Opened the manila envelope that had been sitting in my home office all week, and carried the divorce papers upstairs to our bedroom. I placed them on her pillow, right where her head would rest tonight, when she came home smelling of lavender and guilt and whatever cologne he wore. It felt poetic somehow, symmetrical. She'd been sleeping next to me while betraying me. So now she could come home to papers on her pillow announcing the consequences. I stood there looking at our bed, this king-sized symbol of intimacy and partnership that had become just a place where two strangers slept facing opposite directions and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just this vast emptiness where my marriage used to be. The rest of the afternoon I spent pretending to read a book I'd bought as a joke called Emotional Stability for Dummies, which was actually pretty helpful despite being intended as humor. I learned that acceptance was the final stage of grief, and apparently I'd speedrun through all the others: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, in record time. Now I was just waiting, calm and resolved, for her to come home and discover that the oblivious husband she'd been lying to had finally woken up and decided he deserved better than being someone's safety net while they explored other options. When she walked in that night around 9:15, I was sitting on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, which was unusual because normally I'd be upstairs or in the kitchen or anywhere but positioned directly in her path, like some kind of intervention waiting to happen. I'd stationed myself there deliberately, my prop book about emotional stability sitting in my lap open to a random page I hadn't actually read, and I was pretending to be deeply interested in whatever wisdom it offered about maintaining your sanity when your entire world had gone sideways. She came through the door with her gym bag slung over her shoulder, hair slightly messed up in that way I now recognized as post-affair rather than post-workout, and she was humming something under her breath, probably some song he'd played in his car or whispered in her ear or whatever the hell cheaters do during their 3-hour Saturday sessions. She froze when she saw me, actually physically stopped mid-step like someone had pressed pause on her entire existence. Her eyes went wide and I watched in real time as her brain tried to calculate what was happening, why I was sitting there like that, whether this was normal or something else entirely. "What's this?" she asked, her voice doing that thing where it goes up at the end, turning a statement into a question, revealing nervousness disguised as casual curiosity. She was still standing in the entryway, one hand on the doorframe like she might need to make a quick escape, gym bag slowly sliding down her shoulder. "Go upstairs," I said calmly, gesturing toward the staircase with the book still in my other hand. "Check the bedroom." My voice came out steadier than I expected, no anger or emotion, just these simple instructions delivered like I was telling her we were out of milk or needed to pay a bill. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to read my expression for clues about what awaited her, then slowly set her gym bag down by the door and headed up the stairs. I could hear her footsteps on each step, that familiar creaking on the fifth one that we'd always meant to fix but never got around to, the sound getting quieter as she reached the landing and turned toward our bedroom. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. Then I heard it, a sharp intake of breath, the kind of sound people make when they've been punched in the gut or received news that fundamentally alters their reality. Footsteps coming back down, faster now, almost running, and then she appeared at the bottom of the stairs clutching the divorce papers in both hands like they might dissolve if she didn't hold them tight enough. Her face had gone completely pale. All the color drained out like someone had pulled a plug, and her eyes were doing this rapid blinking thing that meant she was trying not to cry or trying to process, or maybe both simultaneously. "Divorce papers?" she said, her voice cracking on the second word, holding them up like I might not know what she was referring to, like there could be some other document on her pillow that she was confused about. Her hands were shaking, making the papers rattle slightly. This visual representation of her world tilting on its axis the way mine had been tilted for months without her caring or noticing or giving a single damn. I nodded slowly, closing the emotional stability book with a soft thump that seemed louder than it should in the heavy silence between us. "Surprise," I said, and even I could hear the bitter edge in my voice now, all pretense of calm neutrality evaporating in the face of her shock. "You said you wanted me time. Well, this gives you a lifetime of it. Congratulations, you're free." I stood up from the couch, setting the book on the coffee table with deliberate care, and watched her face cycle through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. "I can explain," she blurted out, taking a step toward me with her hand outstretched like she was reaching for a lifeline, the papers still clutched in her other hand. Her voice had gone up an octave, panic mode fully activated, and I could see her brain scrambling for an explanation that would make this okay, that would put the pieces back together, that would somehow reset us to before I knew what I knew. "Don't," I said firmly, holding up my hand to stop her approach and her words simultaneously. "Seriously, just don't. This isn't a group project where we collaborate on finding excuses. This isn't a team effort. You already failed the solo test, and there's no makeup exam." I could feel anger rising now, replacing the calm I'd carefully maintained all day, bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest where I'd been storing it for weeks. "I know about the Saturdays. I know about him. I know about the black SUV and the coffee shops and the hotel and every single lie you've told me," while smiling to my face. Her mouth fell open in this perfect O of shock, like a cartoon character realizing they've been caught, and the papers slipped slightly in her grip. "It's not what you think," she whispered, which had to be the most cliché thing anyone has ever said when caught cheating, like there was some secret context that would make meeting another man every weekend for months totally innocent and explainable. "Oh, good," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm so thick you could probably bottle it and sell it. "So you're not cheating? You're just conducting an emotional field trip every Saturday, taking your feelings on a little adventure, exploring alternative relationship models without bothering to mention it to your actual husband." I started pacing now, unable to stand still, all that stored energy from months of suspicion and investigation and pain finally finding an outlet. "Please enlighten me. Tell me what I think is happening versus what's actually happening. Because from where I'm standing with photographic evidence and timestamps and deleted GPS history, it looks pretty fucking clear." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air, tears starting to stream down her face in those dramatic tracks that smeared her carefully applied makeup. "Logan," she started, but I cut her off again because I'd heard enough, been lied to enough, made a fool of enough to last several lifetimes. "The papers are ready. Bill Hargrove is my lawyer. Maybe you've heard of him. He's excellent at divorce cases, especially ones involving adultery. You can get your own lawyer, obviously. We'll divide everything 50-50, except apparently you've already been dividing yourself 50-50 for months now, so maybe you're ahead of the game." I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but in this house having this conversation, breathing this air thick with betrayal and tears and the death of everything we'd built. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small and broken, still holding those papers like they might turn into something else if she just believed hard enough. "Literally anywhere that isn't here," I replied, opening the door and stepping out into the night air that felt crisp and clean compared to the suffocating atmosphere inside. "I suggest you read those papers carefully and sign them. Or don't. Either way, we're done. This marriage ended months ago. I'm just making it official." I slept like a man who'd finally turned off a years-long alarm clock that had been going off in the background of his life. That constant low-level anxiety and suspicion and dread that had been my soundtrack for months suddenly silenced by the simple act of taking control and making a decision. I crashed at Eli's place that night, on his couch that smelled faintly of beer and regret, but felt more comfortable than my own bed had in ages. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't lie awake staring at the ceiling wondering where my wife really was, or what she was really doing, or who she was really with. I knew now. I'd known for weeks. And more importantly, I'd done something about it instead of just marinating in my own misery and playing the role of oblivious husband. The next morning, my phone lit up around 7 with a text from her. Just 2 words that appeared on my screen while I was drinking Eli's terrible coffee that tasted like it had been made sometime during the Reagan administration and reheated multiple times since. While visiting Mexico, my wife secretly changed our flight details and left witut Mu Epsilon as a prank. Next day, she started sending me messages when she arrived in the USA. It was hilarious. She said, I ignored her for 7 days until I replied, thanks for this. Susan has been the sweetest. 71 desperate calls. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who expects much from life. A decent cup of coffee, maybe some Netflix that doesn't buffer every 5 seconds, and the basic human courtesy of not being abandoned in a foreign country by the person who promised to love me till death do us part. Apparently, that last one was asking too much. I woke up that morning in our beachfront resort in Cancun with the kind of drowsy optimism that only comes from expensive thread counts and the distant sound of waves crashing. The sun was doing that thing where it filters through white curtains like some kind of tropical heaven, and I stretched out my arm expecting to find my wife, Sabrina Caldwell, probably scrolling through Instagram or planning which overpriced smoothie bowl we'd be Instagramming for breakfast. Instead, my hand hit cold sheets and the devastating realization that I was alone. Not alone like she's in the bathroom, alone, but alone like something is fundamentally wrong with this picture alone. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, squinting at the screen with one eye still refusing to participate in consciousness. That's when I saw it. The text message that would basically define the next chapter of my life, and not in the motivational poster kind of way. It was hilarious. You should have seen your face while you were sleeping. I stared at those words like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. Hilarious? What was hilarious? Did I snore particularly loud? Did I drool? Was there a spider on my face that she heroically removed while I slept? My brain, still operating at about 40% capacity, tried to piece together what possible scenario could warrant this level of amusement at 7 in the morning. Then I noticed the silence. Not the peaceful, meditative kind of silence you pay extra for at wellness retreats. This was the wrong kind of silence. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your fight or flight response start doing warm-up stretches. I sat up, suddenly very awake, and looked around the room. Her suitcase, the massive pink monstrosity she insisted on bringing despite my reasonable protests about baggage fees, was gone. Not just moved, but vanished, like it had never existed. I stumbled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold tile floor, and started checking the bathroom, the closet, under the bed like some kind of deranged detective investigating the case of the missing wife. Her sandals? Gone. Those ridiculous ones with the little flowers on them that she bought at a market in Playa del Carmen 2 days ago, claiming they spoke to her soul. Her phone charger? Vanished. Even that god-awful sun hat she loved, the one that made her look like she was auditioning for a role in a retired librarian's vacation photo album, completely absent. My hands started shaking. Not from fear, exactly, but from that special cocktail of confusion, anger, and what the hell is happening that your body serves up when reality stops making sense. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through our text thread, looking for clues, explanations, or maybe a hidden message that said, Psyche, I'm hiding in the closet. Nothing. Just that one cryptic text about my sleeping face being hilarious. I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I called the hotel desk. My voice came out higher than I intended, cracking like a 13-year-old's during puberty. Hi. Yes, this is room 412. Did my wife leave? Like check out? Without me? I tried to sound casual, like this was a totally normal question that people asked every day. Like I wasn't currently standing in a luxury hotel room in Mexico, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and existential dread, questioning every life choice that led to this moment. The receptionist's voice came through with the kind of cheerfulness that felt personally offensive given my current mental state. Yes, sir. Ms. Caldwell checked out at 3 a.m. She mentioned you had separate travel plans and didn't want to wake you. She said to tell you to enjoy your extra week here. Separate travel plans. Those 3 words hit me like a piñata bat to the face. We booked these tickets together 6 months ago. I was there when she clicked purchase on both our flights. I remember because she made me triple check the dates and then accused me of not being excited enough about the trip. I had been excited. I'd taken time off work, coordinated with my boss, told all my friends I'd be offline. This was supposed to be our romantic getaway, our chance to reconnect, our Instagram-worthy vacation that would make everyone back home jealous of our perfect marriage. My hands were definitely shaking now. I hung up on the overly cheerful receptionist and immediately called the airline, navigating through what felt like 47 automated menus before finally reaching a human being who confirmed my worst nightmare. Yes, Mr. Thornton, I see here that your wife contacted us yesterday afternoon and changed your return flight to next Tuesday. She mentioned you wanted to extend your stay. She took the 6 a.m. flight back to Louisville this morning. I stood there in the middle of that beautiful hotel room, phone pressed to my ear, barefoot on the cold tile, holding a half-eaten mango I'd apparently grabbed from the fruit basket at some point during this crisis without even realizing it. The mango was dripping juice down my hand. I watched it drip, mesmerized, because it was easier than processing what was actually happening. My wife, the woman I'd married 3 years ago in that barn venue she'd insisted on despite my allergies, the woman who promised to be my partner through thick and thin, the woman who literally stood in front of 200 people and vowed to honor and cherish me, had just abandoned me in Mexico like I was a goldfish she'd gotten bored of. And apparently, she thought it was funny. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding that stupid mango, and stared at my phone. Another text popped up. Don't worry, I'll pick you up next week. Miss you already. Face blowing a kiss. Miss me? Miss me? Lady, you just committed what I'm pretty sure counts as spousal abandonment with a side of psychological warfare. And you're hitting me with kiss emojis? I looked around the empty room, our room, which was now just my room, and tried to figure out if this counted as a kidnapping, a divorce starter pack, or just stupidity with sunscreen. The mango juice was still dripping. Somewhere outside, people were laughing and splashing in the pool, living their normal, non-abandoned lives. And me? I was sitting in paradise, alone, holding fruit, and wondering if my marriage had just ended via text message and budget airline logistics. Spoiler alert, it absolutely had. I spent the first hour after my wife's great disappearing act trying to convince myself this was all some elaborate joke. You know, the kind where someone jumps out from behind a potted plant yelling surprise, and everyone laughs and hugs it out, and we all pretend this wasn't a deeply traumatic experience that'll require years of therapy to unpack. I genuinely expected Sabrina to come bursting through the door with her phone out, recording my reaction for TikTok or whatever social media platform she was currently obsessed with this week. I even checked behind the curtains. Not my proudest moment, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and apparently I'd become the kind of person who searches hotel rooms for his hiding wife, like we're playing the world's worst game of hide and seek. But no, she wasn't hiding behind the curtains, or under the bed, or in the shower doing that thing where you stay really quiet and try not to laugh. She was just gone. Actually, legitimately, no joke gone. Probably somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico right now, sitting in seat 17B, sipping a complimentary ginger ale, and thinking about how hilarious this whole situation was. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down at it with the kind of dread usually reserved for checking your bank account after a night of drunk online shopping. Relax. It's a prank. I'll tell everyone how you freaked out. It'll be funny. I read that message 3 times, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. A prank. She called this a prank. Like putting plastic wrap over the toilet seat is a prank. Like hiding someone's keys is a prank. Abandoning your spouse in a foreign country and stealing his return flight is not a prank. It's a felony with vacation vibes. I typed out about 15 different responses, each one angrier than the last, but deleted them all. What was I supposed to say? Hey honey, great prank. Really got me. Nothing says comedy gold like international abandonment. No, she didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. Even though she had. Even though I was currently spiraling in a hotel room, trying to figure out if my marriage had just ended or if this was just another Tuesday in the Sabrina Caldwell chaos show. Yeah, hilarious. Like identity theft, but with marriage vows. Like being catfished except you're already married to the catfish. Like finding out your life partner thinks emotional terrorism is a personality trait. I needed coffee. Not the wimpy hotel room coffee that tastes like sad water filtered through old socks, but real coffee. The kind that could wake up a coma patient or fuel a small rocket ship. The kind of coffee that might help me process the fact that my wife had just gaslit me across international borders. I got dressed in yesterday's clothes because apparently all my clean stuff was in Sabrina's suitcase. Of course it was. And headed downstairs to the hotel bar. It was barely 9 a.m., which felt too early to start drinking, but also seemed like exactly the right time given the circumstances. The bartender gave me a look that said he'd seen this movie before, and I was just the latest rerun. "Strongest coffee you've got," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "And maybe a map to the nearest U.S. embassy, if that's a thing you keep behind the bar." He smiled sympathetically and poured me something that looked like it could strip paint. Perfect. I sat there trying very hard not to look like a man whose entire life had just imploded before breakfast, which is harder than it sounds. I kept checking my phone, partly hoping for an explanation that made sense, and partly hoping Sabrina would text something so ridiculous I could use it as evidence in the divorce proceedings I was increasingly convinced were in my future. That's when I noticed her. The woman sitting 3 seats down with a laptop covered in stickers that looked like they'd been collected from every corner of the internet. "Wi-Fi wife, read one. Exes don't deserve tax refunds," announced another. There was a third one that just said, "Nope," in bold letters, which honestly felt like the most relatable thing I'd seen all morning. She had this calm, focused energy, the kind that suggested she had her life together in a way I currently did not. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, glasses perched on her nose, fingers flying across the keyboard like she was writing the great American novel or at least a very strongly worded Yelp review. I must have been staring because she looked up and caught me mid-existential crisis stare. Instead of being weird about it, she just smiled slightly and went back to her laptop. Professional. Unbothered. Definitely not the kind of person who would abandon someone in Mexico for laughs. I turned back to my paint stripper coffee and pulled out my phone, Googling U.S. Embassy Cancun, because that seemed like the adult thing to do. I was so absorbed in trying to figure out if I needed an appointment or could just show up and explain that my wife had committed what I was pretty sure was at least 3 different crimes. I didn't notice the woman had moved closer until she spoke. "Let me guess," she said, her voice carrying the slightly amused tone of someone who'd seen enough tourist disasters to write a book about it. "Stranded tourist?" I looked up, probably looking exactly as pathetic as I felt. "Close," I said, attempting a smile that definitely came out more like a grimace. "Stranded husband." My wife thought disappearing and stealing my return flight would be funny. Her eyebrow raised in that way that communicated an entire paragraph of judgment without saying a word. "Funny? Depends on who's laughing. You don't seem like the one finding the humor in it." "Yeah. Weird how being abandoned in a foreign country kills my sense of comedy," I said, surprised by how bitter I sounded. Must be something about the international betrayal that dampens the mood. She actually laughed at that, a real laugh, not the polite kind people do when they're uncomfortable. "That's fair. I'm Susan, by the way. Susan Morales. Travel writer, professional observer of tourist disasters, and apparently now a witness to whatever this situation is." "Miles Thornton," I said, shaking her offered hand. Professional disaster, amateur abandoned husband, and current star of what I'm calling How I Lost My Wife and Found Trust Issues, a Mexican adventure. Catchy title, Susan said, settling onto the barstool next to mine. Could use some work on the subtitle, though. Maybe a tale of betrayal, budget airlines, and bad decisions. I laughed, and it felt good. Weird, but good. Like my face had forgotten how to do anything except look confused and mildly panicked for the past 2 hours. Susan gestured to my phone, where the embassy website was still pulled up. "You're going about this the hard way. The embassy can't really do much unless she stole your passport, which I'm guessing she didn't." I checked my wallet, relieved to find my passport still there. No, she left me that. And apparently a hotel room for another week that I definitely can't afford on my own. "Okay, so here's what you do," Susan said. pulling out her own phone with the efficiency of someone who'd solved problems in foreign countries before. First, we get you a temporary room you can actually afford. There's a decent place 2 blocks from here, clean, cheap, no bedbugs. Then we deal with getting you a flight home that doesn't cost your firstborn child. And maybe, if you're interested, we get you some tacos, because nobody should deal with spousal abandonment on an empty stomach. I stared at her, this complete stranger who was being kinder to me in 5 minutes than my wife had been in the past 24 hours. Why are you helping me? Susan shrugged, closing her laptop. Because my ex once left me at an airport because he said I walked too slow. Took me a week to realize that wasn't a flaw in my character. It was a blessing in disguise. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, you know? Might as well help someone else figure that out faster than I did. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sabrina. Miss you already. Face blowing kiss, 2 hearts. I showed it to Susan, who made a face like she'd just tasted something expired. Yeah, she said flatly. You're gonna need those tacos. And honestly, she was right. Turns out Susan Morales wasn't just blowing smoke when she said she could help. Within an hour, this woman I'd met exactly 60 minutes ago had found me a hotel room that didn't require selling a kidney, helped me fill out some kind of form for the airline that might, emphasis on might, get me a flight change without bankrupting me, and was currently leading me through the streets of Cancun toward what she promised were life-changing tacos. I was skeptical about the life-changing part, mostly because my life had already changed pretty dramatically in the past few hours, and I wasn't sure tacos could compete with spousal abandonment on the transformation scale. But I was hungry, exhausted, and following a stranger through Mexico seemed like exactly the kind of decision-making I was capable of right now. Susan had this energy about her that I can only describe as aggressively competent. Like she'd seen enough chaos in her life that nothing really fazed her anymore. She walked with purpose, dodged street vendors with practiced ease, and somehow managed to look completely at home in a foreign country while I was still trying to remember if I'd put on deodorant that morning. So, she said as we navigated around a group of tourists taking selfies with a street performer dressed as a Mayan warrior. How long have you and the disappearing wife been married? 3 years, I said, stepping over a puddle that may or may not have been water. 3 years of what I thought was marriage, but was apparently just me being the audience for her one-woman show of chaos. Susan laughed, that same genuine laugh from earlier. Oh man, I know that feeling. My ex used to call himself spontaneous. I called him unemployed and irresponsible, but potato. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't even need to look to know it was Sabrina. She'd been texting every 15 minutes like clockwork, each message somehow more oblivious than the last. I pulled it out anyway, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Don't be mad. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Come on, lighten up. You're too serious. Everyone at home thinks this is hilarious. Face with tears of joy. I showed the screen to Susan, who made a sound that was half laugh, half disgusted snort. Everyone at home thinks it's hilarious? Who's everyone? Her other personality? The voices in her head. Probably her mom, I muttered. That woman thinks Sabrina walks on water. Could literally commit arson and her mom would be like, oh, she's just being creative with fire. Susan steered me into a small taco stand that looked like it had been there since the beginning of time. The kind of place that had exactly 3 items on the menu and made all of them perfectly. No Instagram-worthy neon signs, no cutesy decorations, just an older woman behind a grill who looked at us like she could see into our souls and found mine particularly pathetic. Dos al pastor, uno carnitas, Susan ordered without hesitation, then looked at me. You're not vegetarian or anything, right? At this point I'd eat cardboard if someone served it with enough hot sauce, I said. The woman behind the grill cracked what might have been a smile and got to work. We sat at a wobbly plastic table on the sidewalk, and I typed out a response to Sabrina. Then deleted it. Typed another one. Deleted that too. Susan watched me with the expression of someone who'd been exactly where I was. You want my advice? She asked. I feel like you're going to give it whether I want it or not. True. Don't respond. Not yet. Let her sit in the silence for a while. Let her wonder if you're mad, or hurt, or just done. Right now, she thinks this is all part of her hilarious prank. She needs to realize it's not. I stared at my phone, at those messages with their stupid emojis, and realized Susan was right. Every time I responded, even with anger, I was playing Sabrina's game. I was being the audience, the straight man to her comedy routine, the person who cleaned up her messes and made excuses for her behavior. I put my phone face down on the table. Okay, radio silence it is. Good man, Susan said as the tacos arrived. Now eat. You look like a strong breeze could knock you over. She wasn't wrong. I'd been running on adrenaline and coffee since 6 a.m., and it was starting to catch up with me. I took a bite of the al pastor taco and understood immediately why Susan had used the phrase life-changing. It was perfectly seasoned, the pineapple adding just the right amount of sweetness, the meat tender and flavorful. For about 30 seconds, I forgot I was an abandoned husband eating his feelings on a sidewalk in Mexico. Right, Susan said, watching my face. I told you. You weren't lying, I admitted. These are legitimately incredible. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, which was weird because I'd just met this woman and usually I'm terrible at silence with people I don't know. But Susan had this way of making everything feel normal, like sitting on a curb eating tacos with a stranger was just another Tuesday. Can I ask you something? I said between bites. Why are you being so nice to me? I mean, you literally just met me. I could be a serial killer or a timeshare salesman or something equally terrible. Susan wiped her hands on a napkin and considered the question. Honestly, because when I was going through my breakup, I was alone in Prague trying to figure out how to get home with a maxed out credit card and a shattered sense of reality. A random bartender helped me out, didn't ask for anything in return, just helped because he could. I swore if I ever saw someone in a similar situation, I'd pay it forward. So I'm like, your Good Karma Project? More like my fellow survivor of relationship disasters project, she corrected. Plus, I'm a travel writer. This is literally going to make great content. How to Survive Being Abandoned in Paradise, a guide. I laughed despite myself. You're going to write about this? Oh, absolutely. With your permission, obviously. I'll change the names to protect the guilty. She grinned. Your wife is going to be Karen, the universal name for people who think the rules don't apply to them. Perfect. She'd hate that. I took another bite of taco, feeling something shift in my chest. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the absence of the constant low-level anxiety I'd been carrying for years. You know what's weird? I haven't felt this relaxed in months. Maybe years. I'm literally stranded in a foreign country. My marriage is probably over. I have no idea how I'm getting home, and somehow I feel better than I did yesterday. Susan nodded like this made perfect sense. That's because yesterday you were managing someone else's chaos. Today you're just dealing with regular problems that have actual solutions. Big difference. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Sabrina was apparently escalating from confused to concerned. Miles, seriously answer me. This isn't funny anymore. Why aren't you responding? Susan glanced at my phone. How long do you think before she realizes she messed up? Honestly, I'm not sure she will. Self-awareness isn't really her strong suit. I finished my taco and leaned back in the plastic chair. She once rear-ended someone in a parking lot and spent 20 minutes explaining to the other driver why it was actually their fault for being parked there. Jesus. Yeah. And I stood there nodding along like that made sense. Like I was her backup singer in the performance of Nothing Is Ever My Fault, the musical. Well, Susan said, standing up and stretching. Consider this your retirement from that show. Come on, let's get you checked into that hotel, and then maybe we can actually enjoy the city. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because someone else needed you to? I thought about it and couldn't remember. Every vacation, every weekend, every free moment had been spent either managing Sabrina's latest crisis or preventing the next one. I'd become so good at anticipating her needs that I'd forgotten I had my own. I honestly can't remember, I admitted. Then we're starting today, Susan declared. Rule number 1 of being a functional human. Occasionally do things that make you happy. Radical concept, I know. We walked back through the streets of Cancun, and for the first time since I'd woken up that morning, I wasn't thinking about Sabrina or the mess waiting for me back home. I was just walking, eating excellent tacos, talking to someone who treated kindness like it wasn't a limited resource. My phone buzzed one more time. I looked at it, saw another desperate message from Sabrina, and did something I'd never done before. I turned off the notifications. Susan saw and gave me an approving nod. Look at you, setting boundaries. I'm so proud I might cry. Don't, I said. I'm barely holding it together as it is. But I was smiling. actually smiling. And somewhere between the tacos and the sunshine and Susan's matter-of-fact kindness, I started to think that maybe being abandoned in Mexico wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. The next morning, Susan convinced me to actually explore Cancun instead of sitting in my budget hotel room, spiraling into an existential crisis. She had this whole philosophy about how wallowing was fine for like an hour max, but after that you were just marinating in your own misery, and that helped nobody. Come on, she'd said, banging on my door at 8 a.m. like some kind of motivational drill sergeant. I'm taking you to the local markets. Real Mexico, not the resort gift shop version where they charge $40 for a shot glass. So there I was, wandering through narrow streets lined with vendors selling everything from hand-painted pottery to questionable knockoff designer bags, following a woman I'd known for less than 24 hours who somehow felt more reliable than my wife of 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Susan was in her element, chatting with vendors in Spanish that was way better than my high school Donde está la biblioteca nonsense, haggling over prices with a smile, showing me which stalls had the good stuff versus the tourist traps. And somewhere between watching her negotiate over a woven blanket and sampling fresh mango from a street cart, my brain decided it was time for a highlight reel of all the red flags I'd ignored in my marriage. You know that thing where you're fine until you're not, and then suddenly your brain is like, hey, remember that time? And proceeds to dump 3 years of suppressed memories on you like an emotional avalanche? Yeah, that happened. First memory, Thanksgiving, year 2 of our marriage. I'd spent the entire day before grocery shopping for what I thought was going to be a quiet dinner for 2. Maybe her parents if they were in town. I'd bought a turkey, the fancy stuffing mix, 3 kinds of pie because I couldn't decide, the whole Norman Rockwell painting setup. I was feeling pretty good about myself, honestly. Domestic as hell. I came home from work that Wednesday to find Sabrina had invited 40 people over. 40. She'd posted about it on Facebook while I was in a meeting and apparently just assumed I'd be cool with feeding a small army on 24 hours notice. Surprise, she'd said, like this was a gift and not a logistical nightmare. I thought it would be more fun with people. You're always saying we should be more social. I'd said that once. About maybe inviting our neighbors over for coffee. Not about hosting a refugee camp's worth of people for a major holiday, without discussion. I'd spent that entire Thanksgiving running between the kitchen and the dining room like a deranged caterer, while Sabrina held court in the living room, telling everyone how spontaneous and fun she was. 3 people had asked me where the bathroom was. One guy I'd never met ate the last slice of pumpkin pie I'd been saving. I'd smiled through the whole thing because that's what you do, right? You don't make a scene. You don't tell your wife in front of 40 near strangers that maybe a heads up would have been nice. You okay? Susan asked, pulling me out of the memory. You just made a face like you bit into a lemon. Just remembering stuff, I said. Bad stuff. Marriage stuff. The greatest hits collection, Susan said knowingly. Let me guess, you're suddenly remembering all the times she did something ridiculous and you just went along with it? Bingo. I picked up a small ceramic turtle from one of the stalls, turning it over in my hands. How'd you know? Because that's what happens when someone shows you who they really are and you finally believe them. All those little moments you explained away start looking different in hindsight. She bought the turtle and handed it to me. Here, something to remember this trip by that isn't emotional trauma. I pocketed the turtle and kept walking, but my brain wasn't done with me yet. Memory number 2, the pottery wheel incident. We'd been saving for a trip to Italy. Nothing crazy, just a week in Rome, maybe Florence. I'd been putting money aside from every paycheck for 6 months, had a whole spreadsheet tracking our progress, because I'm that kind of person. We were so close. Another 2 months, and we'd have enough for flights and a decent hotel. I came home one day to find a pottery wheel in our living room. A full-size, professional-grade pottery wheel that cost roughly the same as 2 round-trip tickets to Europe. It was on sale. Sabrina had explained, already covered in clay, looking at me like I was the crazy one for not being excited. I've always wanted to try pottery. This is me investing in my creativity. The pottery wheel got used exactly 3 times before it became a very expensive side table. We never made it to Italy. I'd started the savings fund over, but then the transmission went out in her car, and then her sister needed help with rent, and then there was always something. The Italy fund became the whatever Sabrina needs right now fund, which was apparently its destiny all along. Oh man, you just made another face, Susan observed. What was this one? Let me guess. She made a major purchase without telling you. Pottery wheel, I said. Killed our Italy trip. Used it 3 times. Susan winced. Ouch. Yeah, my ex bought a motorcycle with our wedding fund. Said we could just get married at the courthouse instead because marriage is about love, not expensive parties. Then he left me for someone he met at a biker rally, so I guess he was half right. That's awful. I got a good blog post out of it and learned to never date anyone whose idea of financial planning is it'll work out. She steered us toward a taco stand. Apparently her solution to everything involved tacos, which honestly, I wasn't mad about. The pottery will become a family heirloom, or does it haunt your living room? Side table, I admitted. She stacked mail on it for a year before I finally sold it on Craigslist. Of course she did. Susan ordered for both of us without asking, which should have been annoying, but somehow wasn't. What else? I can tell you're on a roll. Memory number 3 hit me while we were waiting for the tacos, the great wine incident. We'd bought this couch together, one of the few things we'd actually agreed on. It was cream-colored, which I'd argued against because cream-colored anything in a house was just asking for trouble. But Sabrina loved it, said it made the room feel elevated and sophisticated, whatever that meant. It cost more than my first car. 3 months later, she spilled an entire bottle of red wine on it during a party. Not a glass. A bottle. The full-sized, plenty of alcohol content kind of bottle. And instead of, I don't know, apologizing or even acknowledging it was a bummer, she'd just laughed and declared that it gave the couch character. Character. Like the couch was a protagonist in a coming-of-age novel instead of an expensive piece of furniture now sporting what looked like a crime scene. I'd spent the next week trying every carpet cleaner known to man, while Sabrina posted pictures of the stained couch on Instagram with captions about embracing imperfection and living authentically. She got 200 likes. The couch never recovered. It gave it character. I muttered out loud without meaning to. What did? She spilled red wine on our expensive couch and said it gave it character. I spent a week trying to clean it, and she acted like I was being uptight for caring. Susan stopped walking and looked at me with an expression that was half sympathy, half wanting to reach through time and shake past me. Miles. Buddy, that's not quirky. That's just being inconsiderate and then gaslighting you about it. I know that now, I said. But at the time, I thought I was being too rigid. She always made me feel like I was the problem for having, normal expectations about how adults behave. The tacos arrived, and we found a spot to sit, this time on an actual bench instead of a curb, which felt like progress. Susan was quiet for a minute, just eating and thinking, which I appreciated. Not everything needed immediate commentary. You want to know what I think, she finally said. I feel like I'm about to find out either way. She smiled. Fair. I think you've been living with someone who used spontaneous as an excuse for I don't want to consider how my actions affect other people. And I think you've been so busy being understanding and flexible and accommodating that you forgot you're allowed to expect basic respect from your partner. That hit harder than it should have. Or maybe exactly as hard as it needed to. Yeah, I said quietly. I think you're right. Of course I'm right. I'm always right. It's my best and most annoying quality. She bumped my shoulder with hers. But hey, look at the bright side. You're figuring this out now instead of 20 years from now when you've got a mortgage and kids and even more reasons to stay in something that makes you miserable. My phone buzzed. It had been doing that less frequently, like Sabrina was starting to realize that her usual tactics weren't working. I glanced at it. I'm starting to get worried. This isn't like you. I showed it to Susan, who snorted. Not like you? Not like you to what? Except being abandoned in Mexico with grace and humor? She's really doubling down on the gaslighting, huh? It's her specialty, I said, putting the phone away. That and rewriting history until she's always the victim. Well, she's about to learn that you can't gaslight someone from 1,000 miles away when they've got a friend who sees through the bullshit. Susan finished her taco and wiped her hands decisively. Come on, we're going to the beach. You're going to sit in the sun, drink something with an umbrella in it, and remember what it feels like to exist without managing someone else's chaos. Is that an order? Absolutely. I'm very bossy when I'm right, which, as I mentioned, is always. We headed toward the beach, and with every step, I felt a little lighter. Like I was physically walking away from 3 years of making excuses, of cleaning up messes, of pretending that chaos was the same thing as charm. Susan called it out simply as we hit the sand. You've been living with a performance artist. And the performance was emotional chaos. I nearly choked on the coconut water I just bought. That's exactly what it was. Oh my God. I was the audience paying for the tickets. Exactly. And now, she spread her arms wide, gesturing at the ocean. Now you're a free man in Mexico with a new friend, good tacos, and the chance to figure out who you are when you're not playing supporting actor in someone else's drama. I sat down in the sand, watching the waves, feeling the sun, and thought about pottery wheels and wine-stained couches and 40 unexpected Thanksgiving guests. All those moments I'd explained away, minimized, accommodated. All those red flags I'd painted green in my mind. Not anymore. Day 3 of my Mexican exile started the same way Day 2 ended, with Sabrina blowing up my phone like it was her full-time job. The difference was, by Day 3, I'd stopped even looking at the notifications. They'd just become background noise, like cicadas in summer or that one car alarm that goes off every night at 2 a.m. and everyone just learns to ignore. I was having breakfast at a cafe Susan had recommended. Real coffee, actual food, no existential dread included. When my phone started vibrating so hard it nearly fell off the table. I glanced at the screen and saw Sabrina's face, the photo from our wedding where she looked absolutely perfect and I looked like I'd been caught mid-sneeze. Fitting, really. I declined the call and took another bite of my chilaquiles. 30 seconds later, she called again, and again, and again. It was like playing whack-a-mole, except the mole was my wife's total inability to accept that I wasn't playing her game anymore. The texts started coming in rapid fire, each one a masterclass in missing the point. You're not seriously mad, right? Everyone's laughing. You should too. Come on, Miles, don't be dramatic. Fine. I'll book you another flight. Don't be like this. Don't be like this. Like I was the one being unreasonable. Like I was the one who'd committed what was essentially a federal offense against marriage. Classic Sabrina. Reframe everything until she's the reasonable one and you're the stick in the mud for having feelings about being wronged. I screenshot the messages and sent them to Susan with the caption, "She's spiraling." Susan's response came back immediately. Good. Let her spiral. She's earned it. I smiled and ordered another coffee. Susan was meeting me later to check out some Mayan ruins, which sounded way more interesting than engaging with whatever Olympic-level mental gymnastics Sabrina was performing back in Kentucky. My phone rang again. This time it was Daniel Cole, my best friend since college, and the only person who'd consistently told me that Sabrina was a lot, even when I wasn't ready to hear it. I answered, grateful for a call that didn't come with manipulation attached. Dude, Daniel said before I could even say hello. Dude, she left you in another country? Who does that? My wife, I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. Or maybe my soon-to-be ex-wife. I haven't decided yet. Haven't decided? Miles, she abandoned you internationally. That's not hoopsie. Forgot to tell you I changed the flights. That's, I need a lawyer and possibly a restraining order territory. I know. I watched a group of tourists walk by, all wearing matching t-shirts that said Squad Trip in glitter letters. Even they probably had better travel partners than I did. I'm just trying to process everything, you know? 3 years of marriage doesn't just evaporate because of one massively insane thing. No, but it should make you look back at all the other massively insane things and connect the dots, Daniel said. I could hear him typing in the background, probably at work, but too invested in my drama to care. Man, that's not a prank. That's a therapy starter pack. That's a Netflix documentary waiting to happen. Wife Gone Wild, a story of international abandonment. I laughed despite myself. Susan said something similar, except she called Sabrina a performance artist specializing in emotional chaos. Susan? Who's Susan? Travel writer I met at the hotel. She's been helping me navigate the whole stranded in Mexico thing, getting me cheap rooms, showing me around, keeping me from completely losing it. There was a pause on Daniel's end. Okay, don't take this the wrong way, but is Susan single? Daniel, I'm just saying. You're in Mexico, your wife just revealed herself to be a cartoon villain, and some kind stranger is helping you? That's literally the plot of every rom-com ever made. It's not like that, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what it was like. She's just being nice, paying forward some kindness someone showed her during her own breakup. Uh-huh. And she's doing this out of the pure goodness of her heart. Yes? Not everyone has ulterior motives, Daniel. Some people are just decent human beings who help other decent human beings when they're in bad situations. Fair enough, Daniel conceded. But if you two end up falling in love over tacos and sunset walks, I'm calling it now so I can say I told you so at your wedding. There's not going to be a wedding. I'm still technically married, remember? Technically is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, my friend. We talked for a few more minutes about logistics, whether I needed money, if my boss was cool with me extending my time off, whether I should just cut my losses and come home now versus staying. Daniel was firmly in the stay and figure your life out camp, which honestly surprised me. I'd expected him to tell me to get on the next flight and deal with everything like an adult. Nah, man, he said when I told him this. You never take time for yourself. Ever. You're always managing Sabrina's latest crisis or covering for her or explaining her to people. Take the week. Hell, take the month if you can swing it. Figure out what you want when her chaos isn't drowning out everything else. After we hung up, I sat there feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Supported. Not just by Daniel, but by Susan, by this whole weird situation that had forced me to stop and actually think about my life instead of just surviving it. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister, Grace Thornton, and I knew from experience that she was about to bring a level of righteous fury that even Sabrina wouldn't be prepared for. Miles Benjamin Thornton, she said in that voice that meant I was either in trouble or someone else was about to be. I just talked to Mom. She just talked to Sabrina's mom. What in the actual hell is happening? So you heard. Heard? Miles, she abandoned you in Mexico. That's not heard. That's what the fuck territory. Grace had never liked Sabrina, not from day one. She'd smiled through the wedding and been polite at family gatherings. But I knew. Sisters always know. I swear to God, I'm going to drive to her house and... Grace, don't. It's not worth it. Not worth it. She committed what I'm pretty sure is at least 3 different crimes. Theft, maybe kidnapping, definitely being a garbage human being. That last one isn't a crime. It should be. I could hear her pacing, which she always did when she was worked up. Miles, you've been making excuses for her for 3 years. 3 years of, oh, she's just spontaneous, and that's just how she is, and she doesn't mean it that way. And all of us have been biting our tongues because you seemed happy, or at least happy-ish, and we figured you knew what you were doing. Turns out I didn't, I admitted quietly. Grace's voice softened. No, you didn't. But that's not your fault. You're a good person who assumed the person you married was also a good person. That's not naive. That's just human. But Miles, she paused for emphasis. You always said she was just quirky. Quirky people don't commit international abandonment. Quirky people collect stamps or learn to juggle or wear mismatched socks. They don't steal your flight and leave you in another country. I know. Do you? Because you've been cleaning up her messes for so long, I'm not sure you know where her chaos ends and your life begins. That hit hard, mostly because it was exactly what Susan had said yesterday. And what Daniel had implied, and what I'd been slowly realizing over the past 3 days of actually having space to think. I'm figuring it out, I said. Being down here, away from all of it, it's like I can finally see everything clearly. All the stuff I explained away, or minimized, or just accepted because that's what you do in a marriage. No, Grace said firmly. That's not what you do in a marriage. In a marriage, both people care about each other's feelings. Both people consider how their actions affect their partner. Both people don't treat abandonment like it's a hilarious prank. When you put it that way, it sounds really bad. That's because it is really bad, Miles. Like, divorce lawyer bad. Like, tell everyone what she did so they stop thinking she's quirky and start seeing she's terrible bad. I laughed despite the heaviness of the conversation. You really don't like her, huh? I didn't like her before she pulled this stunt. Now I'm pretty sure if I saw her I'd throw something. Nothing heavy, just like a shoe or maybe a salad. Something that makes a point without catching a charge. Please don't assault my wife with produce. No promises, Grace said, but I could hear the smile in her voice. Seriously though, what are you going to do? Right now? Stay here for the rest of the week. Think. Breathe. Eat tacos with Susan. Susan. Why does everyone keep asking about Susan like that? Because when a man's wife abandons him and he immediately mentions another woman's name multiple times, people notice. She's just a friend who's helping me out. Uh-huh. Is she single? Oh my God. You and Daniel need to start a support group or something. But I was smiling. Yes, she's single. No, nothing is happening. I'm still married to the woman who left me here, remember? Barely married, Grace corrected. Technically married. Married in name, only married. You're the second person to point out that technicality today. That's because it's an important technicality. Grace sighed. Look, I'm not saying jump into something new. I'm just saying don't jump back into something that's been slowly killing you for 3 years. You deserve better than someone who thinks your feelings are punchlines. After we hung up, I ordered another coffee, my third, but who was counting, and looked at my phone. 71 missed calls from Sabrina. 71. The woman had called me 71 times in 3 days and still somehow thought she was the reasonable one in this situation. The final text sat there, all caps, punctuation abuse. Who is Susan? I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Typed out one word, logistics. Her response was immediate. What does that mean? I didn't answer. Let her sit with that. Let her wonder. Let her feel a fraction of the confusion and frustration I'd felt 3 days ago when I woke up abandoned. Susan arrived at the cafe right on time, sunglasses on, ready for our Mayan ruins adventure. She slid into the seat across from me and immediately clocked my expression. You told her about me, didn't you? Maybe mentioned your name once. And she's losing her mind? Like it's an Olympic sport and she's going for gold. Susan laughed and raised her coffee cup. To chaos chickens coming home to roost. I clinked my cup against hers. To chaos chickens. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like maybe I wasn't the one cleaning up after them. On the 5th morning of my unplanned Mexican sabbatical, I woke up before my alarm and didn't immediately feel that familiar knot of anxiety in my chest. You know the one. The feeling that something's wrong or about to go wrong or needs to be fixed before it goes wrong. The feeling I'd been waking up with for 3 years straight, without even realizing it had become my normal. I sat up in bed in my budget hotel room that smelled faintly like cleaning solution and ocean air, and I felt nothing. Not happy exactly, not sad, just calm. Like my nervous system had finally figured out it didn't need to be on high alert 24/7 anymore. My phone was still on Do Not Disturb, which meant Sabrina's increasingly unhinged messages were piling up in digital purgatory where they belonged. I ignored them and got dressed, grabbed a notebook I'd bought from a street vendor yesterday, and headed to the balcony that overlooked the beach. The sun was just starting to come up, painting everything in shades of pink and orange that would have looked fake if someone had tried to describe them. A few early risers were already on the beach, jogging or doing yoga, or just standing there with their coffee watching the waves. Normal people doing normal things, living lives that probably didn't involve spousal abandonment or international drama. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and stared at it for a minute. Then I wrote at the top, "Things I won't do again." It felt dramatic, like something you'd see in a movie montage where the protagonist has their big revelation moment set to an indie rock song. But I didn't care. I needed to get this out of my head and onto paper before I could talk myself out of it or convince myself I was overreacting. Number 1 wrote itself. Apologize for someone else's stupidity. I'd spent 3 years apologizing to people for Sabrina's behavior. Sorry she's late. Sorry she forgot about your party. Sorry she made that joke about your haircut. Sorry she used your bathroom and reorganized your medicine cabinet because she thought it would be helpful. Sorry, always sorry, like I was her PR representative instead of her husband. Number 2. Call manipulation spontaneity. That one hurt to write because it meant acknowledging how much I'd been lying to myself. Every time she pulled something without warning, I called it spontaneous. Every time she made a decision that affected both of us without consulting me, I told myself she was just creative and free-spirited. I'd rebranded red flags as quirks until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Number 3. Book joint vacations without insurance. Too soon? Maybe, but also painfully relevant. I was working on number 4 when Susan appeared in the doorway to the balcony, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She'd somehow gotten a key to my room, which should have been concerning, but at this point I'd given up trying to understand how she made things happen. The woman had connections. Planning your escape? She asked, handing me one of the coffees and settling into the plastic chair next to mine. Redefining it, I said, showing her the notebook. Making a list of things I'm not doing anymore once I get back to reality. She read over my shoulder, nodding appreciatively. This is good. Healthy. Very new year. New me, except it's not January and you actually mean it. You think I mean it? I think you're the kind of person who makes lists and then follows through on them. Unlike some people who just blow up their lives without a plan and then wonder why everything's on fire. She took a sip of her coffee. What's number 4? I thought about it, pen hovering over the page. Stop accepting "that's just how I am" as an excuse for bad behavior. Susan made an approving noise. Oh, that's a good one. That's the whole enchilada right there. People love to hide behind "that's just how I am," like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card for being terrible. Right? Like, cool, that's how you are. And how I am is someone who doesn't want to deal with that anymore. Exactly. Susan gestured with her coffee cup enthusiastically. See, you're getting it. You're having your moment. I'm so proud I might cry. Please don't. My emotional bandwidth is maxed out as it is. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun finish its dramatic entrance over the ocean. A family was setting up on the beach below, kids already running toward the water while parents hauled umbrellas and coolers. Normal family vacation stuff. The kind of vacation where nobody gets abandoned. Can I add something to your list? Susan asked. Go for it. Stop booking joint vacations with people who might strand you in foreign countries. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. That's fair. That's very fair. Considerate added. Good. I hate people who use adventure as an excuse for bad behavior. Like, no. Karen, abandoning your husband isn't adventurous, it's just mean. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it and saw I'd gotten a text from Daniel. Sabrina just posted a 3-paragraph Facebook status about marriage and communication. It's the most passive-aggressive thing I've ever read. Want me to screenshot it? I typed back, absolutely yes. The screenshot came through 30 seconds later, and I nearly choked. The post started with "Sometimes in marriage, we have to remember that people process things differently," and went downhill from there. It was a masterclass in making herself sound reasonable while subtly implying I was being dramatic and childish for not finding her prank funny. The comments were even better. Most people were confused about what she was vaguing about, but a few of our mutual friends had clearly gotten the full story because they were not having it. Daniel's girlfriend, Rachel. Girl, you left him in Mexico. That's not a communication issue. That's a you issue. My cousin Beth. If by process things differently you mean be justifiably upset about international abandonment, then yeah, I guess Miles is processing differently. Even Sabrina's own college friend had chimed in. This feels like missing reasons. The Facebook post. I showed the phone to Susan, who read through the comments with increasing delight. Oh wow, she said. She really thought this would make her look good, huh? She thought people would be on her side. Apparently. She's always been able to spin things to make herself the victim. Usually works too. Not this time, though. Susan zoomed in on one particular comment from someone named Jennifer. Just so we're clear, you changed his flight without telling him and left him in another country? And you think he's overreacting? Girl, get help. I like Jennifer, I said. Jennifer gets it. Jennifer is the MVP, Susan agreed. She handed my phone back and stood up, stretching. Come on, let's go get breakfast. You can add to your list later, but right now you need to eat something that isn't emotional processing. We ended up at a little place Susan knew that served chilaquiles that could make you forget your own name. While we ate, I kept adding to my mental list of things I wouldn't do anymore. Stop making excuses when people pointed out concerning behavior. Stop prioritizing keeping the peace over being honest. Stop treating my own needs like they were optional extras in my marriage. You know what's weird? I said between bites. I feel guilty. Like, I'm sitting here in Mexico, eating amazing food, hanging out with you, and I feel guilty that I'm not more upset. That's Stockholm Syndrome, Susan said matter-of-factly. Or like, the relationship equivalent. You've been in crisis mode for so long that not being in crisis feels wrong. That's depressing. Super depressing. But also fixable. You just need to retrain your brain to understand that peace is actually the normal state and chaos is the aberration, not the other way around. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sabrina, this one shorter than usual. I don't understand why you're being like this. I stared at it for a long moment, then showed it to Susan. You gonna respond? She asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to lay out exactly why I'm being like this in excruciating detail. But the other part knows she won't actually hear it. She'll just find a way to make it about her feelings. So don't respond, Susan suggested. Not everything deserves a response. Especially not when someone's proven they're not actually asking a question. They're just demanding you validate their version of events. She was right. Sabrina didn't want to understand. She wanted me to tell her it was okay, that I forgave her, that we could laugh about this someday. She wanted me to go back to being the person who cleaned up her messes and called them adventures. I put my phone face down on the table and went back to my kiloquiles. Added another line to my mental list. Stop explaining myself to people who aren't actually listening. Look at you, Susan said, raising her coffee cup. Setting boundaries. Having standards. Not immediately folding like a lawn chair. I'm so proud I might actually cry this time. You keep threatening to cry, but I haven't seen any tears yet. I'm holding them back through sheer force of will. I'm very tough. We finished breakfast and spent the rest of the morning walking through the city, not going anywhere in particular, just existing in space without crisis or drama or someone needing something from me. At one point, Susan stopped to take pictures of a street art mural, and I just stood there watching her work, realizing this was what normal felt like. Not exciting, not adventurous, just normal. And after 3 years of Sabrina's chaos, normal felt absolutely revolutionary. Later that afternoon, we ended up back at my hotel, sitting on that balcony with the ocean view. I'd filled up 3 pages in my notebook by then. Things I wouldn't do, things I wanted to do, things I'd forgotten I even liked because Sabrina's preferences had always taken up all the oxygen in the room. You know what's funny? I said, watching the sunset start to happen. For 3 years, I thought I was being a good husband by accommodating everything, by being flexible, by not making waves. Turns out I was just teaching her that my boundaries didn't matter. Susan looked up from her laptop where she'd been working on an article. That's the thing nobody tells you about relationships. Being accommodating is good until it becomes being a doormat. There's a line, and most people don't realize they've crossed it until they're so far on the wrong side they can't even see the line anymore. Where was this wisdom 3 years ago? Probably in Prague, crying over my own doormat situation and learning these lessons the hard way. My phone buzzed one more time. I looked at it, saw another message from Sabrina, and did something I'd never done before. I opened my notebook, wrote one final line. Next time, I'm escaping on purpose, and put my phone away without reading the message. Susan noticed and smiled. Progress. Yeah, I said, meaning it. I think so. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't Sabrina's safety net or cleanup crew or audience. I was just me. And me was doing pretty damn good, all things considered. By day 7, I'd found something I didn't even know I'd been missing. Peace. Not the everything's fine kind of peace that's really just denial wearing a happy mask, but actual, genuine, wake up and don't immediately check your phone for disasters peace. The kind where you can hear your own thoughts without someone else's chaos drowning them out. Sabrina's text had gone through what I can only describe as the 5 stages of grief, except instead of acceptance at the end. She'd landed somewhere between bargaining and straight-up denial. It was like watching someone speedrun every manipulation tactic in the handbook. Day 1 had been smug. It was hilarious. You should have seen your face. Day 3 was confusion. Why aren't you answering? This isn't funny anymore. Day 5 brought panic. Miles, please. I'm getting worried. Just let me know you're okay. And now, day 7, we'd arrived at what I like to call the spiritual bypassing phase. I've been praying about this. God told me to call you. I stared at that last message while eating breakfast at my favorite cafe. God told her to call me. God, the almighty creator of the universe, apparently had nothing better to do than get involved in Sabrina's self-created drama. I wondered if God had also told her that abandoning your spouse in a foreign country was a bad idea, or if that message got lost in translation. I showed the text to Susan, who'd become my unofficial breakfast companion and life coach over the past week. Oh wow, she said, reading it over her coffee cup. We've reached the Jesus phase of her breakdown. That's new. Is it though? She does this thing where she claims divine intervention whenever she wants something. Like when she bought that pottery wheel, she said God put it on her heart. God's got terrible financial advice then. Susan said, stealing a piece of my toast. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm going to sit here, eat this incredible breakfast, and then we're going to Tulum like we planned. Her spiritual crisis is not my emergency. Susan raised her coffee cup. Look at you, having boundaries. My little student is all grown up. I'm older than you. Emotionally, you're basically a toddler learning to say no. I'm very proud. We finished breakfast and headed out to Tulum, which Susan had been hyping up all week as one of the most beautiful places in Mexico. She wasn't wrong. The ruins sat on cliffs overlooking water so blue it looked photoshopped, and for a few hours, I completely forgot about Sabrina and abandoned flights and 3 years of accumulated relationship debris. Susan and I explored the ruins, took touristy photos, and had one of those conversations that happens when you're walking through ancient history and your own life suddenly feels very small and manageable in comparison. You know what I realized? I said, standing at the edge of the cliff looking out at the ocean. I haven't missed her. Not once. I've been angry, confused, hurt, but I haven't actually missed Sabrina herself. Susan stood next to me, quiet for a moment. That tells you everything you need to know. Yeah, I said. I think it does. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't even check it. God's messages could wait. That evening, we ended up at this place with fairy lights strung between palm trees and music that made you want to stay forever. Susan ordered for both of us. She'd figured out my taste in food after 5 days, which was more attention than Sabrina had paid in 3 years, and we sat there talking about everything except my failing marriage. She told me about her travel blog, Miles and Smiles, which she'd started after her divorce as a way to reclaim her life. The irony of the name wasn't lost on either of us. So you're telling me, I said, that I've been having a breakdown with someone literally named Miles and Smiles. The universe has a sense of humor, Susan said, grinning. Or really terrible timing. Could go either way. How's the blog doing? Good, actually. Turns out people like honest travel content that isn't just influencers pretending everything's perfect. I write about the disasters, the missed flights, the food poisoning, the hotel rooms that smell like feet. Real stuff. Is this going to be real stuff? I gestured vaguely at myself. Am I going to be a blog post titled, "The Man Whose Wife Left Him in Cancun"? Only with your permission, Susan said seriously. And I'd change all the names. You'd be Marcus or something. Marcus. Fine, you pick. How about the guy who finally figured it out? Susan smiled. I like that. Very aspirational. When she asked if I missed Sabrina, I said the truest thing I'd said all week. I missed the peace I thought she'd bring. Turns out, that peace had an early checkout time. Susan laughed so hard, she nearly knocked over her drink. That's the best breakup quote I've ever heard. I'm stealing that for the blog. Royalties appreciated. We spent the rest of the evening under those fairy lights, and I realized something. I hadn't laughed this much in years. Real laughs. The kind that come from your stomach instead of just being polite noise. With Sabrina, I'd always been laughing at her jokes, her stories, her performance. With Susan, I was just laughing because things were actually funny. My phone buzzed multiple times during dinner. By the time we left, I had 43 new messages from Sabrina, each one more desperate than the last. The final one simply read, I don't know what else to say. I typed back one sentence. Maybe try sorry? Then I added, actually don't. Save it for someone who still believes you. I didn't send the second part. Some things didn't need to be said. Walking back to the hotel, Susan bumped my shoulder with hers. You doing okay? Yeah, I said, surprised to find it was true. I really am. Is that weird? That I'm doing okay while my marriage falls apart 1,000 miles away. Not weird at all. Sometimes things need to fall apart so better things can fall together. Besides, your marriage fell apart the moment she booked that flight. You're just finally noticing the rubble. We stopped at my hotel, and Susan gave me this look that was half concerned, half proud. You've changed this week. In a good way. Yeah, I said, thinking about my notebook full of boundaries and the phone full of messages I wasn't rushing to answer. I stopped being the punchline. She smiled and started being the headline. I watched her walk away, then went up to my room and looked at my phone one more time. Sabrina had called 17 more times. Left voicemails I wouldn't listen to. Sent texts I wouldn't read. Because somewhere between the tacos and the ruins and the fairy lights, I'd realized something. She thought she'd left me behind in Mexico. But really, she'd just freed me. And honestly, that was the funniest part of this whole thing. On the 8th morning, I woke up and decided to be petty. Not in a destructive way, not in a burn down her life kind of way, but in that delicious, perfectly justified way that feels like poetic justice wrapped in karma's gift paper. I'd been thinking about it all night. Sabrina had spent the past week treating my silence like it was the unreasonable part of this equation. Like I was the one being dramatic by not immediately forgiving her for what was essentially marital kidnapping with a side of gaslighting. She'd blown up my phone, posted vague Facebook statuses about communication and marriage, and even tried the God card. Nothing had worked, and I could practically feel her panic vibrating through the cellular network. So I decided to give her exactly what she'd given me: uncertainty. I opened my messages, scrolled past the absolute novel of text she'd sent overnight. Seriously, the woman had written more words begging for attention than Tolstoy wrote in War and Peace, and typed out one simple sentence. "Thanks for this. Susan has been the sweetest." I read it over 3 times, making sure it hit exactly the right note of casual and cryptic. Not mean, not cruel, just informative. Then I hit send and waited. The response time was genuinely impressive. My phone started ringing before I could even set it down. Once, twice, 3 times. I declined each call with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for crossing the last item off your to-do list or finding $20 in your coat pocket. The texts started coming in like machine gun fire. "Who is Susan? Miles, answer me. What does that even mean? Are you serious right now?" I took a sip of my coffee, the good stuff from the cafe, not the hotel room sadness water, and smiled. Susan walked in right on cue, somehow already knowing I'd pulled the trigger on what we'd been joking about calling Operation Make Her Sweat. "You did it, didn't you?" she said, not even needing to ask. "I might have mentioned your name." "And she's losing her mind?" I showed her my phone, which was now actively having a seizure with incoming notifications. Susan's eyes got wider with each message. "Oh my God, she called you 71 times? In 30 seconds. 73 now. She's persistent, I'll give her that." Susan sat down across from me, looking at my phone like it was a particularly fascinating science experiment. "What are you going to do?" "Let her cook," I said, using the phrase Daniel had taught me last night during our phone call. Let her sit with the exact feeling she gave me when I woke up to that goodbye text. My phone rang again. And again. The voicemails were piling up like snow in a blizzard, each one probably more unhinged than the last. I could practically hear Sabrina spiraling from 1,000 miles away, which was exactly the right distance for me to be from a Sabrina spiral. "You're kind of enjoying this," Susan observed. "Is that bad?" "Nah. Watching karma work in real time is underrated entertainment. Plus, you've earned some petty revenge. You've been taking the high road for a week. Sometimes you need to take the scenic route through fuck around and find out territory." I let a few more hours pass, during which Sabrina's messages evolved from angry to panic to something that could only be described as a full breakdown. "This isn't funny. You're scaring me. Is Susan the reason you're ignoring me? I can't believe you'd do this to me." That last one made me actually laugh out loud. She couldn't believe I'd do this to her. The woman who literally abandoned me in another country was upset that I'd made a vague reference to another human woman. The audacity was truly Olympic level. Around noon, I finally picked up. Not because I felt bad, but because I wanted to hear her reaction in real time. "Sue me." "Miles," she practically screamed into the phone. "Who the hell is Susan?" "Susan," I said calmly, like we were discussing the weather. "She's been helping me out this week. You know, since I got stranded and all." "Helping you out? What does that mean?" "It means she's been making sure I don't starve or get lost or have a complete mental breakdown while dealing with the fact that my wife committed what I'm pretty sure is a federal offense." "Don't be dramatic," Sabrina snapped, and I could hear her pacing. She always paced when she was losing an argument. "I didn't commit a federal offense. It was a prank that you're blowing out of proportion." "Right, my bad. International abandonment is totally prank territory. Right up there with whoopee cushions and fake lottery tickets." "Miles, is Susan single?" I could hear her trying a different tactic. "Are you? Is something going on?" "Why would that matter?" I asked innocently. "You left me here. What did you think was going to happen? That I'd just sit in a hotel room crying until you decided to care?" "That's not. I do care. I've been trying to reach you all week. Weird how you cared so much after you stole my flight and disappeared at 3 a.m. I took another sip of coffee, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. "But yeah, tell me more about how you care." Susan was watching me with barely contained glee, giving me 2 thumbs up like I was giving a TED talk on standing up for yourself. You're being cruel, Sabrina said, and I could hear the tears starting. The tears always started when she realized she wasn't winning. This isn't like you. You're right, I said. The old me would have apologized by now for making you feel bad about abandoning me. Lucky for you, he's currently taking a vacation from being your emotional support doormat. Miles, is there anything else? Because Susan and I have plans this afternoon. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear the wheels turning, her brain trying to process this version of me that didn't immediately fold. Plans? She finally choked out. Yeah, plans. You know, those things people make when they're not managing someone else's chaos? Susan's teaching me about them. Revolutionary concept. I can't believe you're doing this, Sabrina whispered. Really? Because I'm pretty sure this is just me giving you back exactly what you gave me. Except I'm doing it with words instead of plane tickets. I could hear her crying now, full-on sobbing, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just nothing. Like watching a stranger cry over something that didn't involve me. I need to know, she said between sobs. Are you cheating on me with Susan? I laughed. Actually laughed. Sabrina, you left me in Mexico as a prank. You don't get to ask me questions about my behavior. That ship sailed when you sailed away at 6 a.m. without me. That's not an answer. You're right. Here's an answer. Relax, it's just a prank. Then I hung up. Susan was staring at me with her mouth open. Did you just use her own words against her? Yeah, I did. That was ice cold. Was it too much? Are you kidding? That was perfect. That was poetry. That was... Susan stood up and slow clapped. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. My phone immediately started ringing again. I let it ring, watching Sabrina's face flash on the screen over and over, and felt something shift. Not revenge exactly, more like balance. Like the scales had finally evened out, and I wasn't carrying all the weight anymore. You know what the funny part is? I said to Susan, I don't even feel bad. That's because you shouldn't. She played a stupid game and won a stupid prize. This is just the prize ceremony. We left the cafe, and my phone kept ringing. Kept buzzing. Kept demanding attention it wasn't going to get. And for the first time in 8 days, maybe for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was the one in control of my own life. Sabrina thought she could play games with me, and I'd just accept it. Turns out, I could play too, and I was way better at it than she expected. By the second week of my Mexican liberation, because let's be honest, that's what it was, the narrative back home had shifted in ways that would have been hilarious if they weren't so satisfying. Apparently, Sabrina's funny prank had stopped being funny to everyone except Sabrina herself, and even she was starting to realize that the joke had a punchline she didn't see coming. Daniel called me on day 10 with an update that made my morning coffee taste even better than usual. Dude, he said, barely containing his laughter. You need to hear what's happening back here. It's beautiful. It's like watching dominoes fall, except the dominoes are Sabrina's reputation. Tell me everything, I said, settling into my balcony chair with the phone on speaker so Susan could hear. She'd become my official partner in Schadenfreude, and honestly, it was the healthiest relationship I'd had in years. Okay, so first, remember how she posted that whole thing about communication in marriage? Yeah, people started asking questions. Specifically, your cousin Beth asked what exactly happened that required so much communication. And Sabrina, being Sabrina, told the whole story like it made her look good. Oh no, I said, but I was smiling. Oh yes. She literally posted, I changed Miles' flight as a joke to give him some alone time in Mexico, and now he's being dramatic about it. Posted it publicly, on Facebook, where your entire family could see it. Susan grabbed my arm, eyes wide. She did not. She absolutely did, Daniel confirmed. And then your Aunt Karen, the good Karen, not the mean Karen, commented you abandoned your husband in a foreign country and you're surprised he's upset? And it spiraled from there. I put my head in my hands, torn between secondhand embarrassment and pure joy. What did people say? Oh man, where do I start? Your mom commented just a single question mark, which is somehow the most devastating response possible. Grace wrote an entire essay about how this isn't quirky, it's emotional abuse. My girlfriend Rachel posted a link to an article about narcissistic behavior. Even my mom commented, and she never comments on anything. What did your mom say? This explains so much about their marriage. Which, ouch, but also accurate. Susan was fully invested now, leaning in like we were watching the season finale of a really good TV show. What about her friends? Did anyone defend her? That's the best part, Daniel said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Her friends tried at first. You know, the usual Sabrina's just spontaneous and Miles is probably overreacting stuff. But then people started sharing their own Sabrina stories. Remember when she borrowed Jessica's car and returned it with an empty tank and a parking ticket? Oh God, I forgot about that. Jessica didn't forget. She commented with receipts. Literal photos of the parking ticket. Then other people started piling on with their own stories. It was like watching a dam break, except the dam was made of repressed complaints about Sabrina's behavior. I sat there processing this, trying to reconcile the image of Sabrina I'd been carrying around, spontaneous, creative, free-spirited, with the reality that apparently everyone else had seen clearly while I was busy making excuses. So she's basically been canceled by Facebook? Susan asked. Not canceled exactly, more like exposed. The post has like 200 comments now, and maybe 5 of them are supportive. The rest are either people calling her out or people sharing their own Sabrina horror stories. After I hung up with Daniel, Susan and I sat in silence for a moment, watching the waves crash against the shore. You okay? She asked. I know she's terrible, but that's still got to be weird to process. Honestly, I feel like I've been living in an alternate reality for 3 years, and I'm just now stepping back into the real one. Everyone saw what she was except me. That's not true. You saw it. You just convinced yourself you were seeing it wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Have you seen Facebook? Call me. Then another from my mom. Miles, honey, we need to talk about Sabrina. Then one from Sabrina's own mother. Miles, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd done something like this. I don't know what's gotten into her. That last one hit different. Sabrina's mom had always been her biggest defender, the person who explained away every weird behavior as artistic temperament or creative genius. If even she was apologizing, things had really gone sideways. I called Grace, who answered on the first ring. Please tell me you've seen the Facebook post, she said without preamble. Daniel gave me the highlights. The highlights don't do it justice. Miles, people are dragging her through the mud. And honestly, she deserves it. Do you know how many people have messaged me privately saying they've been waiting for someone to call out her behavior? How many? 17. 17 people, Miles. 17 people who've apparently been bitten by Sabrina's chaos and just never said anything because they thought you were happy. I thought about that. 17 people who'd seen what I couldn't or wouldn't see. 17 people who'd kept quiet to keep the peace, just like I had. What's she saying now? I asked. Oh, she's gone full victim mode. Posted another status about how hurtful it is when people don't understand your sense of humor. But here's the thing, nobody's buying it anymore. Even her college friends are being like, girl, maybe sit this one out. That evening, I got a text from Sabrina's boss at the architecture firm where she worked. We'd met a few times at company parties, and he'd always seemed like a reasonable guy who probably wondered why his employee's husband always looked vaguely stressed. Miles, I hope you're doing okay. Sabrina mentioned the Mexico situation. Just wanted to say that if she treats clients the way she apparently treats her personal relationships, we're going to have some serious conversations when she gets back to work. Wishing you the best. I showed the text to Susan, who let out a low whistle. Her boss just essentially told you he's going to discipline her for her personal behavior. That's wow. Is it bad that I don't feel bad about it? Not even a little bit. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. She played the stupidest game possible, and the prize is everyone finding out who she really is. My phone kept buzzing throughout the day. Mutual friends asking if I was okay. Family members offering support. Even my old college roommate reached out saying he'd always thought Sabrina was a lot, but hadn't wanted to say anything. The one that got me, though, was from my boss, Richard. Taking some extra time is absolutely fine. In fact, take another week if you need it. Your wife's prank made the rounds at the office. HR wants to talk to you about our family crisis leave policy when you get back. We've got your back. I stared at that message for a long time. My boss had heard about this. HR knew. Everyone knew. The story had spread beyond Facebook and into real life, and everywhere it went, people were unanimously agreeing that Sabrina had massively screwed up. You know what the weirdest part is? I said to Susan that night over dinner. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Like, see? I wasn't crazy for being upset. But mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. You spent 3 years gaslighting yourself into thinking her behavior was acceptable. Finding out everyone else thought it was insane doesn't erase those 3 years of confusion. How are you so wise about this stuff? Therapy. So much therapy. Like, an amount of therapy that would make Freud say maybe that's too much therapy. She smiled. But seriously, you're processing years of normalized chaos in real time. Cut yourself some slack. Later that night, Sabrina posted one more Facebook status. Someone screenshot it and sent it to me within minutes. I'm taking a break from social media to focus on my mental health and healing. I hope everyone who piled on today feels good about themselves. The comments were immediate and merciless. Girl, you abandoned your husband in Mexico. Log off. Healing from what? From consequences? The caucasity of making yourself the victim here is truly Olympic level. Even worse for her, someone had commented, maybe use this social media break to Google how to apologize without being manipulative. It had 63 likes. I put my phone down and looked out at the ocean. Somewhere back in Kentucky, Sabrina was dealing with the fallout of her actions for the first time in probably her entire life. No one was buying her version of events. No one was making excuses for her. No one was cleaning up her mess. For once, she was sitting in the consequences of her choices, and apparently those consequences were uncomfortable enough that she needed to heal from them. You think she'll actually learn from this? Susan asked, following my gaze to the water. Honestly, probably not. People like Sabrina don't usually have come-to-Jesus moments. They just find new audiences who haven't figured them out yet. Cynical, but accurate. 3 years of marriage will do that to you. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Sabrina's mom. Miles, I owe you an apology. I've been enabling her behavior for years. I convinced myself she was just creative and free-spirited, but I see now that I was making excuses for someone who needs to grow up. You deserve better. I'm sorry. I read it twice, then showed it to Susan. Her own mother, Susan said quietly. That's got to sting. Yeah, I said. But maybe that's what she needs. Not people protecting her from reality, but people finally letting reality catch up to her. Think she'll try to call? Probably. But I'm not picking up. Good, Susan said, raising her beer bottle. To consequences finally finding their target. I clinked my bottle against hers. To consequences. And somewhere in the Mexican night, with the sound of waves and distant music and the peaceful absence of chaos, I realized something. The joke hadn't just reversed. It had finally told the truth. And the truth was, Sabrina had been the punchline all along. I stayed another month. Not because I was running away or hiding or avoiding the inevitable return to reality, but because for the first time in years, maybe ever, I was making a decision based purely on what I wanted. Not what someone else needed. Not what would keep the peace. Not what would make me look like a good husband or a responsible adult. Just what I wanted. And what I wanted was to stay in Mexico a little longer. My boss had been surprisingly cool about it. After the "your wife abandoned you in another country" story made the rounds at the office, I'd suddenly become the recipient of an absurd amount of goodwill and understanding. Richard told me to take all the time I needed, that my projects could wait, and that honestly, the team was just impressed I was handling everything so well. I didn't tell him that handling it well mostly involved eating tacos and pretending my phone didn't exist. I'd also started working remotely, which turned out to be shockingly easy when you weren't spending half your mental energy managing someone else's emotional chaos. I'd get up early, knock out my work before lunch, and then spend the afternoon exploring with Susan or just sitting on the beach reading books I'd been meaning to read for years, but somehow never had time for. Turns out, I'd had plenty of time. I'd just been spending it all on Sabrina. Susan and I had fallen into this easy rhythm that didn't need labels or definitions or urgent conversations about what this is. We'd grab breakfast together most mornings, work on our respective laptops in companionable silence, then go do something. Explore a new part of the city, try a restaurant one of her blog followers recommended, or just sit on the beach and exist without crisis. You know what's weird? I said one afternoon, watching her edit photos for her blog. We were at our usual cafe, the one that had basically become our office. I'm happier right now, in the middle of my marriage falling apart, than I was in the entire 3 years of actually being married. Susan looked up from her laptop, pushing her glasses up her nose. That's not weird at all. You're finally not carrying someone else's emotional baggage. You're traveling light. Is that a travel blog metaphor? Everything's a travel blog metaphor if you're brave enough. She grinned. But seriously, you've been walking around for 3 years with a 50-pound backpack full of Sabrina's issues. Of course you feel lighter now that you've put it down. I didn't realize how heavy it was until I wasn't carrying it anymore. That's the thing about slowly increasing weight. You don't notice until someone asks you why you're walking funny. My phone buzzed. It had been doing that less and less over the past few weeks. Sabrina's attempts to reach me had gone from constant to frequent to occasional to sporadic. The Facebook fallout had apparently taught her that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the victim in this story, though I doubted the lesson had really sunk in. This time it was Daniel. Sabrina hired a divorce lawyer. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a moment, waiting for the panic or sadness or any of the emotions I thought I'd feel when this moment came. Instead, I felt relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. She filed. I said to Susan, showing her the text, "How do you feel?" Like I just got parole from a prison sentence I didn't realize I was serving. Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Good. That's the correct response. I called Daniel back, putting him on speaker so Susan could hear. How'd you find out? I asked. She posted about it. Not directly, but one of those vague, sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones posts with a photo of her looking sad in golden hour lighting. Someone commented asking if she was okay, and she said she'd made the difficult choice to file for divorce. Susan made a noise that was half laugh, half disbelief. She made the difficult choice? SHE made it. That's Sabrina, I said. Rewriting history until she's always the protagonist making brave choices instead of the chaos goblin facing consequences. Chaos goblin, Daniel repeated. I'm using that. That's perfect. We talk logistics for a bit. I need to get a lawyer, deal with paperwork, figure out what to do about our apartment and our stuff, and all the boring administrative tasks that come with untangling a life. But none of it felt urgent or scary. It just felt like items on a to-do list, and I was good at to-do lists. After we hung up, Susan closed her laptop and gave me a look I'd come to recognize as her real talk incoming face. So, she said, what are you going to do? Long term, I mean. Honestly, I have no idea. Get divorced, obviously. Probably find a new apartment since ours has wine stains and bad memories. Keep working, keep existing, maybe get a therapist to unpack why I spent 3 years in a relationship that made me miserable. Those are all good plans, Susan said carefully. But what do you want? Not what you should do or what's responsible or what makes sense. What do you actually want? I thought about it, watching the street outside the cafe. Tourists taking photos, locals going about their day, the whole world just spinning along without needing my input or permission. I want to keep feeling like this, I said finally. Not the divorce part or the drama part, but this part. The part where I wake up and my first thought isn't, what crisis do I need to manage today? I want to keep working remotely sometimes. I want to travel more. I want to have breakfast with people who make me laugh instead of people who make me anxious. Those are achievable wants, Susan said, smiling. Are they though? Or is this just some temporary Mexico magic that'll disappear the second I get back to real life? Real life is what you make it. You've been living in Sabrina's version of real life for 3 years. Time to build your own version. Over the next few weeks, I did exactly that. I found a divorce lawyer who came highly recommended and who, upon hearing my story, said, yeah, this should be pretty straightforward. She doesn't have much of a leg to stand on legally or morally. I started apartment hunting online, looking at places that were just mine. 1 bedroom, because I didn't need space for someone else's pottery wheel or impulse purchases. Near a park, because I discovered I actually liked running when I wasn't too stressed to remember I had legs. I called my family and actually talked to them instead of just giving them surface-level updates designed to avoid questions about my marriage. Turned out, they were pretty great when I wasn't using all my energy pretending everything was fine. And I spent time with Susan. Not dating, exactly, because neither of us was ready to label what we were doing. But we were doing something, and that something felt healthy and easy and nothing like the complicated mess I'd just escaped. One evening, about 3 weeks before I was planning to fly home, we were sitting on the beach watching the sunset. It had become our thing, this daily ritual of watching the sky do its dramatic performance in shades of orange and pink and purple. You know what I realized? Susan said, drawing patterns in the sand with her finger. This is the longest I've hung out with someone without wanting to run away. Is that a compliment, or are you setting up an elaborate joke? It's a compliment, you weirdo. I like hanging out with you. You're the only person I've met in years who doesn't make me feel like I need to be on all the time. Right back at you, I said. You're like the human embodiment of not needing to try too hard. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about how different this felt from sitting with Sabrina. With her, silence meant she was plotting something or upset about something or about to announce she'd made a major life decision without consulting me. With Susan, silence was just silence. Peaceful, easy, not requiring translation or management. So, she said eventually, you're going back in 3 weeks. Yeah. And then what? And then I start my actual life. The one where I'm not a supporting character in someone else's chaos show. Think you'll miss Mexico? Absolutely. But I think I'll miss this version of me more if I don't take him home with me. Susan smiled. Good answer. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Sabrina, the first one in days. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. I read it, then showed it to Susan, who rolled her eyes so hard I worried they might get stuck. You got what you wanted, she quoted. Like you wanted any of this. Like you secretly hoped your wife would abandon you in Mexico so you could have an extended vacation. Should I respond? What would you say? I thought about it, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. There were a lot of things I could say. I could point out that she was the one who filed for divorce. I could remind her that she started this whole mess. I could list every single thing she'd done wrong over 3 years and document exactly how we got here. But instead, I just deleted the message and put my phone away. Nothing, I said to Susan. There's nothing to say that would make a difference. Look at you, being emotionally mature and stuff. I'm so proud. I learned from the best, I said, bumping her shoulder with mine. We watched the rest of the sunset in silence, and I realized something. Sabrina thought she'd left me behind when she took that flight at 6 a.m. 3 weeks ago. She thought she was teaching me some kind of lesson or pulling off the prank of the century or whatever backwards logic had convinced her that abandoning your spouse was comedy gold. But really, she just freed me. Freed me from thinking I needed to fix everything, from believing that love meant accepting chaos, from the exhausting work of making excuses for inexcusable behavior. She'd freed me to find out who I was when I wasn't busy being her safety net. And that person? He was sitting on a beach in Mexico, watching the sunset with someone who made him laugh without making him anxious, making plans for a life that didn't require crisis management or damage control. That person was doing pretty damn good. You know what's funny? I said to Susan as the last bit of sun disappeared below the horizon. What? She thought abandoning me would be hilarious. And honestly, it kind of was. Just not in the way she expected. Susan laughed, that real laugh I'd come to love over the past month. That's the spirit. Turn your trauma into comedy. Very healthy. I learned that from you too. I'm a terrible influence. The best kind. We walked back to the hotel as the stars started coming out, and I thought about how 3 weeks ago I'd been a man holding a half-eaten mango, barefoot in a robe, wondering if his marriage counted as kidnapping or just stupidity with sunscreen. Now I was just a man who'd survived, learned, grown, and come out the other side with better boundaries and an appreciation for really good tacos. Sabrina had tried to make me the punchline of her joke, but the joke was on her, because I'd never been happier in my entire life. And that, my friends, was absolutely hilarious.